The phone felt greasy in my hand, heavier than it should. "No, Lisa, I'm not blowing you off. I'm at the office. Again." My voice was flat. I was too tired for this fight. Too tired for any fight. Across the glass, 50 floors down, Chicago was a circuit board of cold, indifferent light. Headlights flowed like data streams down Michigan Avenue. I watched them. A river of people going somewhere. Going home. And here I was. Stuck. A deal is closing. I have to be here. A lie. The deal was fine. The partners were just paranoid. And I was their 24-hour paranoia checker. Always an excuse, Alex. Always. Her voice was a thin, tinny sound through the phone's speaker. I had stopped holding it to my ear 10 minutes ago. "I know. I'm sorry. I'll make it up to you." The same words I'd said last week. The week before that. My reflection stared back from the dark window. A pale ghost in a $1,000 suit. A tired ghost. "Just call me when you get home." A click. She was gone. I tossed the phone onto the polished mahogany of my desk. It skidded and stopped next to a stack of binders, a monument to my wasted 30s. I leaned back in my leather chair, the kind that was supposed to make you feel powerful. I just felt pinned down. I stared at the city again. All those lights, all those lives, none of them mine. I wish I could just throw it all away. The thought came out of nowhere, sharp and clear. Just walk away from the desk. Leave the key card. Don't look back. My coffee cup, half full of cold black sludge, rattled against its saucer. A tiny, distinct clack, clack, clack. I frowned. A low rumble vibrated up through the soles of my shoes, the L train, running in the tunnels deep below. This building always did that. I had stopped noticing it months ago. I rubbed my eyes, the heels of my palms pressing in until I saw spots. I had to finish this review. One more pass. Just one more. I pulled the binder closer, the lamplight pooling on the dense, black text. Subsection 4A. Indemnification clauses. My world had shrunk to this, to words that meant everything and nothing. The silence of the office settled around me. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of an empty building at night. A waiting silence. Minutes stretched. The words on the page started to swim. My head nodded once. Twice. I snapped it up, blinking hard. A whisper. "Throw it all away." It was right there. Right next to my ear. A breath of sound, no louder than the rustle of a page. But it was a voice. A boy's voice. I froze. Every muscle in my body went tight. I ripped my AirPods from my ears and slammed them on the desk. They weren't even on. I spun my chair around. Nothing. The office stretched out behind me, a cavern of dark wood and shadowed glass, the empty desks of the paralegals, the closed door to the partner's suite, the faint green glow of an exit sign at the far end of the hall. No one. Of course there was no one. The cleaning crew didn't come up to this floor until after midnight. My heart was hammering against my ribs. A frantic, stupid bird beating itself against a cage. You're exhausted, man, that's all. Hearing things. The first sign of a real burnout. Or a breakdown. I turned back to my desk, my jaw clenched. My eyes fell on my computer screen. It had gone to sleep, a black mirror. It was filmed with a faint, almost invisible layer of condensation. From my own breath, maybe. But there was something on it. A shape. I leaned closer. Not a shape. A word. Traced in the thin film of moisture, like a finger drawn across a frosty window. Ricky. My breath caught in my throat. The name. That name. I hadn't thought of that name in 25 years. It couldn't be. As I watched, the letters thinned. They shimmered for a second, then evaporated into the blackness of the screen. Gone. As if they were never there. What the hell? The words escaped me in a raw whisper. That was it. I was done. I shoved my laptop into my bag, not bothering to shut it down properly. I grabbed my coat. The silence wasn't waiting anymore. It was watching. I could feel it on the back of my neck. I stood up. I walked the perimeter of my office, a glass box inside a larger glass box. I peered down the long, carpeted hallway. Empty. I checked the heavy oak door that led to the elevator lobby. Locked from the inside. just as I'd left it. I was alone. There was a rational explanation. There had to be. Stress, lack of sleep. My mind playing tricks on me. That's what a sane person would think. But the frantic bird in my chest wasn't listening to reason. It was screaming, "Get out! Get out now!" I fumbled with my keycard, swiped the lock on my office door, and stepped into the elevator lobby. The marble floor gleamed under the recessed lighting. It was cold here. Colder than it should be. I jabbed the down button. A soft electronic chime echoed in the space, and the arrow above one of the elevators lit up. The doors slid open with a smooth, expensive hiss. I stepped inside. The polished steel walls reflected a distorted version of me. Pale. Wild-eyed. I pressed the L button for the lobby. The doors slid shut, cutting off the vast emptiness of the 50th floor. The elevator began its descent. 50. 49. 48. The movement was a relief. A smooth, controlled glide away from whatever that was. I leaned against the back wall, my bag clutched in my hand like a shield. My breathing started to slow down. Just a long day, a hallucination brought on by caffeine and stress. Tomorrow it would seem stupid. 47. 46. The lights in the cabin flickered. Once. Twice. Then they went out. Total, absolute darkness. The smooth hum of the elevator died. The gentle descent stopped. I was floating in a black void, suspended somewhere in the guts of the skyscraper. A single, terrifying red light blinked on above the control panel. An emergency light. It bathed the small cabin in a sick, pulsing glow. My heart, which had just started to calm down, exploded into a gallop. I lunged for the control panel. The floor indicator was a mess of glitching red pixels. The numbers jumped. 3421, 45, 19, before finally settling on 2 digits. 13. Floor 13. My building didn't have a floor 13. My hand darted out and slammed the door-open button. Nothing. I hit it again, and again. The steel doors remained shut, sealed. A flat, dead sound answered my frantic pounding. A crackle. It came from the small speaker grill in the ceiling. A hiss of static. Then a sound that didn't belong here. A sound that had no business being in a steel box 40 stories in the air. A song. A children's song. Faint. Tinny. Distorted, like it was coming from a cheap old music box. It was a simple, looping melody. One I knew. From somewhere deep. Somewhere I had buried long ago. Round and round the garden like a teddy bear. My blood went cold. The music stopped. The static hissed again. And then a voice came through the speaker. The same voice from my office. Clearer now. Closer. A young boy's voice. Full of playful disappointment. "Hide and seek is no fun, Alex." A scream tried to claw its way up my throat, but it died as a strangled gasp. I scrambled for the controls, my fingers shaking so badly I could barely aim. I found the brass-ringed emergency call button and jammed it down with my thumb. I held it. The speaker answered, not with a dispatcher's voice, not with a promise of help, just static, loud, roaring static, an empty ocean of noise. I was shouting now, banging on the doors with my fists, the sound echoing in the small space like gunshots. "Hello? Anyone, help me! I'm stuck!" The static cut out. The red light went off. The main lights flickered back on, bright and sterile and impossibly normal. A soft chime rang through the cabin. With a gentle whoosh, the doors slid open. I wasn't on floor 13. I was in the lobby. I stumbled out of the elevator, gasping for air, my legs feeling like they were made of string. The vast, cathedral-like space of the lobby was brightly lit and quiet. George, the night guard, looked up from his desk, a half-eaten sandwich in his hand. "You okay, Mr. Miller?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." My eyes were wide, darting around the lobby. Everything looked normal. The ficus trees. The marble floors. The revolving door leading out to the street. It was real. I was safe. The elevator, I stammered, pointing a shaking finger back at the open doors. It got stuck. The lights went out. It stopped on the 13th floor. George took a slow bite of his sandwich and chewed, his eyes never leaving my face. He swallowed. 13th floor? Sir, this building doesn't have a 13th floor. Goes straight from 12 to 14. Superstition, you know. He gestured with his sandwich toward the sleek control panel on his desk. And the board's all green. System shows all cars running normal. No stops, no power interruptions. He took another bite. Maybe you just dozed off for a second? Long day. I stared at him. At his calm, reasonable face. At the green lights on his panel. He thought I was crazy. Or drunk. Maybe I was. Maybe I had dreamed the whole thing in the 30 seconds it took to get from my office to the lobby. I didn't say another word. I couldn't. I turned, my bag banging against my leg, and practically ran for the revolving door. I pushed through it and burst out onto the cold, damp street. The air hit my face, smelling of exhaust and rain. I didn't stop. I flagged down the first taxi I saw, wrenched the door open, and threw myself into the back seat. Just drive, I croaked at the driver. Anywhere. As the cab pulled away from the curb, I looked back at the monolithic tower I had just escaped. It looked the same as always. A pillar of glass and steel. Silent. Uncaring. My body was still trembling. I fumbled for my phone, needing to text Lisa to hear a sane person's voice. My thumb hovered over her name. That's when I saw it. A notification. One new voicemail. That was impossible. I hadn't heard it ring. I checked the caller. My heart stopped. It wasn't a number. It wasn't a contact. It was my own name. Alex Miller. My own number. The timestamp on the message was 10:47 p.m., 3 minutes ago, right when I was trapped in that box. My hand was shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. With a sense of dread so profound it felt like I was falling, I pressed the phone to my ear and hit play. It wasn't a voice, not at first. It was a sound, tinny, distorted, the exact same melody from the elevator speaker. One step, two step, tickle you under there. The song played for 10 seconds, surrounded by a faint whispering hiss. Then it stopped. A moment of silence. And then, the last sound on the recording. A child's giggle. Close. Amused. My phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the dirty floor of the taxi. I just stared straight ahead, at the blur of city lights passing by, my own reflection a silent, screaming mask in the dark glass. The roar of the city was a distant, muffled thing. I woke up with my cheeks stuck to the cold leather of the sofa, a sharp crease imprinted on my face. The suit I'd worn for 48 hours straight was twisted around me like a straitjacket. A gray, dirty light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my apartment. Morning. I had made it home. I didn't remember the end of the taxi ride. I didn't remember fumbling for my keys or walking through the door. I just remembered staring at my phone, the child's giggle echoing in a brain already cracked from exhaustion. I pushed myself up. My head throbbed in time with a dull, heavy pulse. The place was a mess. My briefcase was overturned on the floor, its contents spilled across the expensive rug. My coat was crumpled in a corner. I didn't care. I needed coffee, a gallon of it. In the kitchen, all chrome and white quartz, I fumbled with the espresso machine. My hands shook. Just a panic attack. That's what it was. A full-blown, Hall of Fame panic attack, brought on by too much work and not enough sleep. The elevator, the non-existent floor, the voice, hallucinations. The voicemail was the weird part. A wrong number. A pocket dial from someone with a kid. It had to be. A sane, rational person could explain all of it. I was a sane, rational person. My life was built on sane, rational decisions. The machine hissed, spitting dark, bitter coffee into a mug. I leaned against the counter, the hot ceramic warming my cold hands. "You need a vacation, Alex," I said out loud. My voice sounded rough, unused. A week. A beach, somewhere with no cell service. I took a long drink of the coffee. It burned my throat. Good. I needed to feel something real. I went into the bathroom. The face in the mirror was a stranger. Pale skin, dark circles under the eyes that looked like bruises. I looked haunted. I looked like my father. I splashed cold water on my face, the shock of it making me gasp. I reached for my razor on the glass shelf above the sink. It wasn't there. I frowned. I always put it in the same spot. Always. I scanned the counter. Nothing. My eyes drifted down. There it was, sitting perfectly centered in the clean, white basin of the sink. The blade gleamed under the recessed lighting. I stared at it for a full 10 seconds. My mind raced, trying to make the connection. I must have been more out of it than I thought last night. So tired I just dropped it in the sink without thinking. That was it. That had to be it. Brain fog? I was just fried. I picked up the razor, rinsed it, and put it back on the shelf, my movements stiff and deliberate. See? A logical explanation. Everything has a logical explanation. I walked into the bedroom to get dressed, to put on a different suit, to go back to the office, to pretend last night never happened. That was the plan. Routine was the cure for this, the rhythm of a normal day. I pulled a fresh shirt from the closet, my eyes automatically going to the nightstand next to my bed, and I stopped. It was a small thing, a wooden box, dark, with a tarnished brass latch, about the size of a brick. I hadn't seen that box in 25 years. It was my box, my childhood box, the one I kept my treasures in, the one my grandfather made for me, the one I had left in my parents' attic in Ohio when I went to college, the one that should not, under any circumstances, be sitting on my nightstand in a Chicago high-rise. My breath hitched. What the? I moved toward it slowly, as if it were a bomb. I ran a finger over the lid. The wood was smooth, familiar. This wasn't a copy. It was real. How did it get here? Lisa didn't have a key to my parents' house. They hadn't been up here in years. No one had been in my apartment. I was sure of it. My heart was starting that frantic bird-in-a-cage routine again. I flipped the rusty latch. It made a small, protesting creak. The lid lifted. The smell hit me first. Old paper and dust and childhood. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded red felt, were the artifacts of a life I'd forgotten. 3 glass marbles, one a perfect cat's eye, a green plastic army man, his rifle broken off at the hilt, and a photograph. A single Polaroid, its colors washed out with age. I picked it up. My fingers trembled. It was a picture of 2 boys, no older than 10, squinting in the summer sun. We stood by a creek, our jeans rolled up, our faces muddy and triumphant. One of the boys was me. A gap-toothed, stupid grin on my face. The other boy, I couldn't see his face. It was gone. Obliterated. Scratched out by a furious fingernail, leaving a white, gouged-out hole in the photograph. I stared at the violent white scar on the picture. I remembered doing that. I remembered the anger. But I couldn't remember his face. I couldn't remember his name. You promised you'd never forget me. The voice was right behind me. A boy's voice. Clear. Close. I could almost feel the breath on my neck. I spun around, a cry caught in my throat. Nothing. The bedroom was empty. The door was closed. Sunlight streamed through the window, catching dust motes dancing in the air. There was no one there. My blood ran cold. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. Silence. The only sound was the thundering of my own pulse in my ears. This wasn't stress. This wasn't a panic attack. This was real. I backed out of the bedroom, my eyes locked on the empty space where the voice had been. I didn't take my eyes off it as I fumbled for the doorknob. I slammed the heavy door shut. My hand shook as I turned the lock. The click echoed in the silent apartment. I stood there in the living room, my back against the wall, breathing hard. My whole body was trembling. It was in the room. Whatever it was in my bedroom. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came from the bedroom door. Soft. Patient. 3 little knocks. From the inside. A choked sob escaped my lips. I slid down the wall, my legs giving out. I was on the floor, staring at the door. "You promised, Alex." The voice came again. It was muffled now, coming from behind the wood, clear as a bell. You scratched his face to forget. But I remember. "Leave me alone!" I screamed, clamping my hands over my ears. It didn't work. I could still hear it, as if it were inside my own head. "I don't know who you are!" "You do." The voice was calm, so terribly calm. "You just don't want to." I couldn't stay here. I had to get out. I scrambled to my feet, my mind a white-hot wall of static. I looked at the front door, my only escape. But I had to walk past the bedroom door to get there. No more running. Last night, I ran. Look where it got me. I had to face this. I had to see what was there. Maybe I was crazy. Maybe I needed to be locked up. But I had to know. I had to see it. My fear was a physical thing, a cold weight in my gut. But underneath it, a hot spike of anger was growing. This was my home. My life. Whatever this was, it had no right. I took a deep breath. Then another. I walked toward the bedroom door, my legs unsteady. My hand reached for the doorknob. It was ice cold. I turned the lock. The click was deafening. I gripped the knob, my knuckles white. I wrenched the door open. I lunged into the room, my body coiled, ready for anything. It was empty. Exactly as I had left it. The bed was unmade. The window was open a crack, a breeze rustling the blinds. The small wooden box was still on the nightstand, its lid open, the scarred photograph peeking out. There was no one there. Relief washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. I was insane. It was all in my head. I laughed, a raw, ragged sound. I leaned against the doorframe, my head bowed, the laughter turning into something that sounded like a sob. My eyes lifted. I looked across the room, into the bathroom. At the mirror over the sink where I had stood just minutes before, the glass was fogged over, a patch of condensation in the center, and on it, drawn in crude, childish letters as if by a small finger, were 3 words. You pushed him. The air left my lungs in a single silent rush. I stared, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. The letters began to thin at the edges, the condensation evaporating in the dry air. In seconds, they were gone. That was it. I didn't grab a coat. I didn't grab my wallet. I turned and ran. I burst out of my apartment and slammed the door behind me. I didn't look back. I sprinted down the hallway, the plush carpet swallowing the sound of my frantic footsteps. I jabbed the elevator button over and over, my whole body shaking. The doors couldn't open fast enough. I stood there, panting, watching the numbers light up above the door. 45, 46, 47. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A deep, instinctual terror seized me. I didn't want to look. I had to. I pulled it out. My hand was shaking so badly the screen was a blur. A notification. A calendar alert. 25th anniversary. Don't forget Leo. I hadn't made that appointment. I didn't know anyone named Leo. But as my mind touched the name, a memory surfaced. A phantom feeling. The slick, mossy stone of a creek bed under my hands. The splash of cold water. A feeling of dread and guilt so old, so deeply buried, it felt like it belonged to someone else. Leo. The elevator chimed. The doors slid open. I stood frozen in the hallway, staring at a name on a screen, and for the first time in 25 years, I was truly, completely, afraid of what I had done. The city was a silent movie outside my office window. 47 floors up, the chaos was reduced to a neat grid of crawling lights. I'd come here on autopilot, a straight shot from my apartment building in a cab I didn't remember hailing. Home wasn't safe. My mind wasn't safe. But this place, this glass and steel tower was my fortress. My name was on the door. My success was in the files stacked on my desk. Reality lived here. I ran a hand over my face. My skin felt tight, papery. The calendar alert. Leo. The name was a key, turning a lock in a part of my brain I hadn't visited in decades. A rusted, corroded lock. It opened nothing but a feeling. A cold, wet dread. No. Stop. I was having a breakdown. A severe, prolonged psychotic episode brought on by stress. That was the logical explanation, the only one that didn't involve ghosts and vengeful children. I had hallucinated the message on the mirror. The calendar alert was a glitch, a crossed signal from the cloud. The box? Maybe my parents sent it and I just forgot. It was all explainable. I just had to hold on to the real world. And the real world was the Kensington Tower acquisition. The biggest, ugliest, most glorious legal fight of my career. I focused on the thick, bound documents on my desk. The weight of them was reassuring. The crisp smell of paper and ink was an antidote to the phantom scent of creek mud and old Polaroids. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking. I had to focus. The preliminary hearing was tomorrow. I took a sip of water from the glass on my desk, my eyes scanning the tidy battlefield I'd prepared. Everything was in its place. The primary brief, the depositions, the appendix of exhibits. My eyes stopped. The main Kensington file, the one bound in blue. It was moved, maybe by half an inch. It was no longer perfectly aligned with the edge of the blotter. My pulse gave a stupid little jump. Don't do this. I must have shifted it myself when I reached for the water. Of course I did. My hand was shaking. I probably knocked it. Jesus, Alex, get a grip. You're letting a half-inch discrepancy unravel you. I forced myself to pick up the phone. I needed to hear a human voice. I dialed Mark in the adjacent office. He picked up on the second ring. Yeah? You get the final numbers from accounting? My voice came out, strained. I cleared my throat. Just send 'em over. You sound like hell, man. Long night, I said, rubbing my temples. Just listen. If we lose this thing, Davies will have my hide. We're not gonna lose, Mark said with an easy confidence I couldn't imagine feeling ever again. You've got the smoking gun. That email from their CFO is a kill shot. Yeah, I said, my eyes fixed on the blue folder. The kill shot. I hung up, my hands slick with sweat. I just needed to get through this. Mr. Davies' office was an icebox. The air conditioning was always cranked to a mortuary chill. He sat behind a desk the size of a small car, his reading glasses perched on his nose, looking at me over the rims. Walk me through it one more time, Alex. I don't like surprises. My confidence was returning in a thin, fragile trickle. This was my territory. No surprises, Robert. Their entire case hinges on the claim that they terminated the initial agreement in good faith. We have an email sent from their CFO to their CEO, dated 2 days before the termination letter, explicitly stating they received a better offer from a competitor and needed to find a pretext to void our contract. It's bad faith, clear as day. It's everything. Davies nodded slowly, a small, satisfied smile playing on his lips. And you have this email? Printed, certified, and ready to go, I said. I opened my leather briefcase on the polished mahogany table. My hands were steady now. The familiar ritual of a high-stakes meeting was like a drug, pushing the madness away. I reached into the main folder, the one for Exhibit A. My fingers found the smooth, thick cardstock of the evidence cover sheet. I pulled it out, and under it, nothing. Just a single, clean sheet of white A4 paper. My brain simply refused to compute. I stared at the blank page. It was impossible. It couldn't be. I patted the inside of the folder. A frantic, quiet motion. Empty. I checked the other sections of the briefcase. Nothing. Just contracts and depositions. Alex? Davis's voice was sharp. I? The words wouldn't form. I could feel the blood draining from my face. My oral landscape shifted. The hum of the air conditioner became a roar, and Davis's expectant face seemed to be miles away. It was here. I checked it this morning. I put it in myself. You put what in, Alex? The email, the printout, it's gone. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Davies took off his glasses and placed them carefully on the desk. His expression had shifted from confidence to a deep, profound disappointment. It was worse than anger. It was the look you give something that has proven to be a complete waste of your time. I can print it again, I stammered, my voice sounding weak, pathetic. It's on the server. On my desktop. The hearing is tomorrow morning, Alex, he said, his voice dangerously calm. We submit our evidence binders today. In 2 hours. Don't tell me you're going to print it again. Tell me it's where it's supposed to be. I looked at the blank piece of paper sitting in front of me. Like a headstone for my career. I don't understand, I whispered. Davies stood up. I think this meeting is over. Find it. Or don't bother coming in tomorrow. The walk back to my office was the longest in my life. Every head that turned in my direction, every whispered conversation that stopped as I passed, felt like a nail being hammered into my coffin. I was no longer Alex, the hotshot attorney. I was Alex, the guy who just imploded in the boss's office, the guy who lost the case. I stumbled into my office and shut the door, leaning my back against it, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had to fix this. I had to print the email. I rushed to my desk. My computer screen was on. I hadn't left it on. I never did. My email client was open. It wasn't on the inbox. It was on the sent folder. There was one email at the top of the list, sent at 7:15 a.m. this morning. My stomach clenched. That was around the time I was fleeing my apartment. The recipient, Carl Reinhardt, the lead counsel for the opposition. The subject, our strategy. My hands flew to my mouth. A wave of nausea rolled through me. No. I double-clicked the email, my hands shaking so violently I could barely control the mouse. The body of the email was blank, but there was an attachment. A single audio file, Leo, MP3. A sound escaped my throat, a strangled gasp. I didn't want to. I had to. I fumbled to plug in my headphones, my fingers clumsy, stupid. I didn't want anyone else to hear this. I put the buds in my ears, the cold plastic shocking my skin. I moved the cursor over the file. It hovered there for a lifetime. Then I clicked. Silence. For a second, I thought it was a blank file. A cruel joke. Then, a sound. The faint, tinny sound of a child's giggle, the same giggle from the voicemail. And then the voice. A boy's voice. Clear and bright and intimately familiar. It'll be much more fun if you lose, Alex. A guttural roar of pure rage erupted from my chest, clawing its way up my throat. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was violation. This thing, this memory, this whatever it was, hadn't just haunted me. It had reached into my life, into my fortress, and it had set a fire. What are you? I screamed at the empty, silent room. The sound bounced off the glass walls, mocking me. What the hell do you want from me? My control shattered. The thin veneer of the successful professional disintegrated into dust. I was 10 years old again, filled with a helpless, burning fury. I swept my arm across my desk. Papers, binders, and legal pads flew into the air, fluttering down like dead birds. A pen holder hit the wall with a sharp crack. It wasn't enough. I grabbed the heavy base of my monitor. The screen flickered, showing the mocking, empty email. You want to play? I yelled, my voice raw. Let's play! With a grunt of exertion, I heaved the entire monitor off the desk. I turned and threw it with all my strength against the polished concrete floor. The explosion of sound was deafening. A percussive crash as the plastic casing gave way, followed by the high, sharp music of shattering glass. The screen imploded, a spiderweb of cracks erupting from the point of impact before it went dark. The sudden silence was even louder. I stood there, panting, my chest heaving, my knuckles white. My perfect, orderly office was a wasteland. Then I became aware of the faces. Through the glass wall that separated my office from the corridor, I saw them. Mark. Jessica from Paralegal. A dozen other people. They were frozen, staring. Their faces weren't angry or concerned. They were horrified. They were looking at me like I was a wild animal, a monster that had just broken its cage. The door flew open. Mr. Davies stood there, his face white with shock. Behind him were 2 building security guards. Alex? Davies said, his voice a cautious whisper. They moved in. I didn't resist. My anger was gone, replaced by a hollow, ringing emptiness. A guard took each of my arms, their grips firm, impersonal. They were handling an object, not a person. As they pulled me from the wreckage of my career, my eyes fell on the monitor I had destroyed. It lay on the floor in a sad, glittering heap. The screen was a black ruin, but in the center, a small section of the LCD was still alive, flickering erratically from the dying electrical charge. Green and red pixels fought against the darkness, struggling to form a coherent image. For a fraction of a second they held. They blinked into a single, short sentence lit against the static. I want you to remember. Then it went dark. The guards steered me through the silent, watching crowd. Their eyes followed me, not with respect, not with envy, but with a new look. A mixture of fear and pity. The look you give a man who has lost everything, starting with his mind. Somehow, I was still here. 3 days on mandatory administrative leave. 3 days of pacing my apartment and ignoring calls from my parents. 3 days of staring at walls, waiting for a little boy's laugh that never came. Then, Davies's call. Not a termination. An ultimatum. I spoke to HR, he'd said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. They recommend a medical evaluation. But the Sterling Hayes deal is now or never. They're spooked. If you can walk in there tomorrow, nail that presentation and close them, we can call your incident a one-time, stress-induced anomaly. If you can't, clear out your desk by 5. This is your last shot, Alex. Don't make me regret it. He didn't have to say the rest. Prove you're not crazy. So here I was, in the gleaming, morgue-like bathroom on the executive floor. I had drunk 4 cups of black coffee, and the caffeine was a frantic hummingbird in my chest. My hands trembled, so I gripped the cold marble of the sink counter to steady them. I looked in the mirror. The man looking back was a stranger. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, ringed with dark circles. His skin was pale, stretched tight over his skull. He looked hunted. I splashed cold water on my face. The shock of it was grounding. Real. Okay, I whispered to my reflection. Sterling Hayes. Net zero emissions target. Q3 diversification. You know this. You wrote it. The words felt like a foreign language. My thoughts kept snagging on a broken monitor. On a single, impossible sentence flickering in the wreck. I want you to remember. Remember what? The overhead lights buzzed and then flickered. Once. Twice. The bathroom plunged into a half-second of darkness before they blinked back to life with a hum. My heart gave a sick lurch. I stared up at the fluorescent tubes. Just a flicker. Power surge. Shitty wiring in a billion-dollar tower. It was nothing. It had to be nothing. I was a lawyer. I dealt in facts and evidence, not omens in bathrooms. I dried my face with a rough paper towel, my knuckles white as I clenched my fists. Get a grip. Just get through the next hour. The conference room was a glass box overlooking the gray expanse of the city. The Sterling Hayes people were already seated, 3 of them, 2 men and a woman, all with the same hard, impassive look. They looked like undertakers come to measure a corpse. My corpse. Davies was at the head of the table, his posture rigid. He didn't look at me as I walked in, which was somehow worse than a glare. His eyes were fixed on the clients, a strained, professional smile plastered on his face. Alex, he said, his voice tight, glad you could make it. This is Mr. Thorne, Ms. Albright, and Mr. Chen from Sterling Hayes. I nodded, my mouth too dry to form words. I just managed a tight, painful smile. The air was thick with judgment. They all knew. The whole firm knew. The story of my meltdown had probably spread faster than a market crash. I was the guy who broke. The guy who got one last chance. Let's begin, I said, my voice a little too loud in the quiet room. I walked to the head of the table, my steps feeling heavy, deliberate. I pulled the USB drive from my pocket. It felt small and real in my sweaty palm. My lifeline. I had stayed up all night, redoing the presentation from scratch on a new laptop, saving it to a new drive. No cloud, no network. Just this one stick, safe. I plugged it into the laptop connected to the massive screen that took up the entire wall. The projector whirred to life. I took a deep breath, turning to face the screen, ready to launch into the meticulously rehearsed opening. It wasn't there. My title slide wasn't there. The polished Sterling Hayes logo wasn't there. Instead, filling the 10-foot screen, was a picture, a child's drawing. It was done in thick, waxy crayon strokes. A big, lopsided green tree with a crooked brown box in its branches. A treehouse. To the side of it, 2 figures. They were just stickmen, circles for heads, lines for bodies. One was at the edge of the treehouse platform. The other one, behind him, had its little stick arms outstretched, pushing. The silence in the room was a physical weight. I could feel every eye on me. I could hear Ms. Albright shift in her seat. I could hear the faint hum of the projector. "I apologize," I stammered, my hands flying to the keyboard. My mind was scrambling, a frantic animal in a cage. How? How was this possible? This drive was clean. I had checked it a dozen times. Seems to be the wrong file. Just one moment. My fingers were clumsy on the trackpad, the cursor jerking across the screen. I tried to click the X to close the image window. It wouldn't close. I clicked again. Nothing. The cursor slid away from my control. It moved with a smooth, unnatural purpose across the screen, away from the close button. It drifted to the corner of the window and clicked on the maximize icon. The drawing exploded, filling the entire wall. The stick figure pushing the other stick figure was now 6 feet tall. A crude, childish monument to violence. A sound came from the laptop speakers. A giggle. It was quiet, tinny, and high-pitched. The same sound from the voicemail. It was unmistakable. It cut through the thick silence of the room like a shard of glass. Mr. Thorne, the lead client, leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Mr. Cross, is there a problem?" My blood ran cold. My skin prickled. "Tell them, Alex." The voice was not in the room. It was in my head. A whisper, clear as a bell, right behind my ear. A boy's voice. Leo's voice. "Tell them what a bad friend you were." I started sweating, a cold, greasy film covering my skin. My starched collar felt like a noose. I could feel Davies's stare burning into the side of my head. I had to stop this. I had to say something, anything. "My apologies," I said, but my voice was thin, reedy. "There appears to be a technical issue. A virus, perhaps." The cursor moved again. It opened a text box at the bottom of the crayon drawing. Black letters appeared, one by one, as if typed by an invisible hand. ALEXDOESNTLIKETOSHARE. Davies stood up. His chair scraped against the floor, a loud, ugly sound. "Alex, what the hell is this?" "Tell them about the secret you kept," the voice hissed in my ear. "Tell them why you were so quiet when you came down from the treehouse. Tell them what you saw. My lungs were burning. I couldn't get enough air. The glass walls of the room seemed to be closing in. The faces of the clients were swimming, their features distorted into masks of confusion and disdain. I was losing. It was all gone. My career, my sanity, my last chance. It was all burning down in front of a crayon drawing. I opened my mouth. I was going to scream. I was going to confess, not to murder, but to madness. I was going to tell them I was sick, that I needed help, that none of this was real. It was a last, desperate bid for pity, but my words didn't come out. My jaw locked. My tongue felt thick, a dead thing in my mouth. A force, cold and absolute, took hold of my throat. I was a passenger, strapped into the driver's seat of my own body, watching in horror. I could feel my own vocal cords vibrating, feel my own lips parting to form words that were not mine. A new voice came out of my mouth. It was high. It was clear. It was the voice of a 10-year-old boy. He didn't want to play with me anymore. The sound of it echoed in the room. It was an acoustic impossibility. A man's body producing a child's voice. Ms. Albright let out a small, sharp gasp. Mr. Chen's eyes were wide, his mouth slightly agape. He looked terrified. Davies's face had gone from angry to a pasty, bloodless white. He looked at me as if I had just sprouted a second head. The voice continued, my own chest rising and falling to give it breath. So I pushed him. The sentence hung in the air. Time stopped. For an eternity, nobody moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the projector, endlessly displaying the crude scene of the crime. The horror in the room was total. It was no longer a business meeting gone wrong. This was something else, something unclean. Then, as quickly as it had come, the pressure in my throat released. Control snapped back. I was myself again, my lungs heaving, my heart hammering like it wanted out of my ribcage. I saw their faces. The disgust. The fear. The profound, bottomless revulsion. They were looking at a monster. I didn't say a word. There were no words. I turned and ran. I shoved my way out of the conference room, my shoulder knocking into the doorframe. I heard Davies shout my name behind me, but it sounded like it was coming from a great distance. I bolted down the hallway, the polished marble floor reflecting the panic on my face, past the staring faces of assistants and paralegals peering out of their offices. As I reached the end of the long, glass-walled corridor, I risked a glance at my own reflection fleeing alongside me. For a single, heart-stopping second, I wasn't alone. Shimmering in the glass, superimposed over my own shoulder, was another figure. Small, translucent, the ghost of a boy in a striped t-shirt. His face was a pale, featureless oval. He was waving at me, a slow, gentle, final wave, goodbye. I blinked, and he was gone. I stumbled through the fire exit, the alarm blaring behind me, a fitting siren for the end of my world. The world had shrunk to the four walls of my apartment. New York City, with its millions of people, might as well have been on another planet. The termination had been brutally efficient, delivered via an email from HR so sterile it felt like an autopsy report. Indefinite leave. A corporate euphemism for, "You're a liability, get out of our sight." So I did. I got out of sight. 2 days. Or was it 3? The sun came up. The sun went down. That was it. I sat on the sofa, staring at the black mirror of the television. My phone lay dead on the coffee table, a black brick I had no intention of reviving. My parents had called the landline until I'd unplugged it from the wall. The cord now lay on the floor like a dead snake. A sound started. A low, persistent gurgle. It came from the direction of the kitchen. I ignored it. Bad plumbing in a building that cost a fortune. I'd call someone. Tomorrow. Or the day after. It didn't matter. The sound was just another broken thing in a broken life. I closed my eyes, willing it to go away, willing everything to go away. I hadn't eaten. The hunger was a dull ache, a companion to the larger ache in my chest. But the gurgling didn't stop. It wasn't a drip. It was a constant, trickling sound, like a brook, like a stream. Annoyance, sharp and hot, finally broke through the gray fog. I pushed myself off the sofa, my joints cracking in protest. My head swam for a second. I put a hand on the wall to steady myself and walked into the kitchen. The faucet was bone dry. Not a single drop hung from the spout. I leaned over the sink, my ear close to the drain. Nothing. The sound wasn't coming from the pipes. It was coming from the kitchen counter. My stomach tightened. My tablet, the one I used for reading legal journals, was on the granite countertop, propped up against the fruit bowl. The screen was on. The gurgling was coming from its speakers. I didn't turn it on. I hadn't touched it in days. I picked it up. My hand was shaking. It was playing a video. The video was grainy, shot on an old camcorder. The colors bled at the edges like a watercolor left in the rain. It was a picnic. I recognized my mom's checkered blanket. I saw my dad, younger, more hair, laughing as he flipped a burger on a small grill. I saw myself, a short, skinny kid with scabby knees and a familiar striped t-shirt. I was skipping stones across a shallow, fast-moving stream, and then the camera panned. Another boy, same age, same scabby knees. He had a mop of unruly blonde hair. He was laughing, trying to catch the stones I was skipping before they sank. Leo. The name felt like a rock in my throat. I hadn't said his name aloud in 20 years. Hadn't even let myself think it. But there he was, alive, laughing. The water rushed over his bare ankles, the sound from the tablet's tiny speakers filling the silence of my kitchen. The exact sound I had been hearing. The video froze. It froze on Leo's face, his mouth open in a wide, happy grin. You remember him now. The voice was everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't from the tablet. It was in the air. A boy's voice. Clear. Calm. It coiled in my ears. He trusted you, Alex. I dropped the tablet. It clattered against the floor, the screen cracking. But the image of Leo's frozen face remained, staring up at the ceiling. He climbed that tree because you dared him. Shut up! I slammed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The voice was inside my skull. I backed away, stumbling against the counter. My hand brushed against something cold and glass. A bottle of bourbon, half full. A failed attempt at self-medication from the first night. Without thinking, I grabbed it. My muscles coiled. A scream of pure, raw fury ripped from my throat as I hurled it across the room. "You're not real!" The bottle shattered against the far wall, a splash of amber liquid and a starburst of broken glass. The sharp smell of alcohol filled the air. "It's all in my head! All of IT!" The voice answered, its tone unchanged, placid, reasonable. "If I'm imaginary, Alex, why are you so scared?" My breath hitched. The logic of it was a knife twisting in my gut. He was right. People don't throw bottles at their own thoughts. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird trying to break free. "It's in the house. It's in the house." The thought repeated, a frantic drumbeat of terror. I had to hide. My eyes darted around the apartment. The living room felt too open. The bedroom, too exposed. The closet, the walk-in closet in the hallway. Dark, cramped, safe. I ran. My bare feet slapped against the hardwood floor. I wrenched the closet door open, scrambled inside among my hanging suits and forgotten winter coats, and pulled the door shut behind me. Plunged into darkness. The only light was a thin sliver under the door. I held my breath. I pressed myself back against the wall, the smell of cedar and mothballs filling my nostrils. I strained to listen. Nothing. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that means something is listening. Not even the hum of the refrigerator. Just the frantic thumping of my own blood in my ears. I squeezed my eyes shut. "Don't be real. Please, please don't be real." Minutes passed. 5, 10. Each second stretched into an eternity. Maybe I had scared it off. Maybe the act of violence, the shattered bottle, had broken the spell. My hand, slick with sweat, reached out and pushed the closet door. It opened a crack, just an inch. I put my eye to the gap, my vision filled with a narrow slice of the hallway floor. It was empty. The floorboards were clear. Relief, so powerful it almost made me sick, washed over me. I was losing my mind, that's all. A breakdown. A complete psychotic break after the stress of the last few days. I was crazy, but I was alone. Then I saw it. On the floor. A footprint. A single, small, wet footprint. A child's footprint. It was just a few feet away from the closet door. It hadn't been there before. I followed the trail with my eyes. Another print. And another. A line of small, wet footprints leading from the direction of the kitchen, from the shattered tablet and the memory of the stream, and stopping directly in front of the closet where I was hiding. He knew where I was. He was right outside. I slammed the door shut, the latch clicking with a sound like a gunshot in the silence. My back slid down the wall until I was huddled on the floor. My heart was going to explode. I buried my face in my knees, trying to make myself smaller, trying to disappear. I was a 10-year-old boy again, hiding from a monster. A vibration against my leg. I almost screamed. It took a moment to realize what it was. My phone. My dead phone. In my pocket. But it wasn't dead. My hand trembled so badly I could barely get it out of my pocket. The screen was lit up. It wasn't a call. It wasn't a text message. It was the lock screen. The background was gone. The generic cityscape wallpaper I'd set years ago was gone. It had been replaced by a photograph. That old, faded Polaroid from the wooden box in my childhood bedroom. The picture of me and Leo, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. The same picture I had stared at 100 times, the one with the angry, deep scratch gouged across Leo's face. Except the scratch was gone. His face was whole, perfect. His blue eyes seemed to sparkle from the screen. He was smiling at me. And below the restored image, where the time and date should have been, a single line of text had appeared, black letters on the bright, glowing screen. "I'm here with you, Alex." The cold plastic of the phone was slick in my hand. My thumb was numb. I couldn't feel it pressing against the screen, but the image of Leo stayed lit, a terrible, smiling ghost powered by a battery that should have been dead for 2 days. "I'm here with you, Alex." The words burned behind my eyes. The air in the closet was thick. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't about the lack of oxygen, it was the pressure, the weight of the silence outside the door. He was out there, waiting. He knew where I was. Hiding was useless. Hiding was what a kid does. I had to move. My legs were jelly, but I forced them to work. I pushed myself up, my back scraping against the rough cedar wall. My hand found the doorknob. It was cold. So cold. I turned it slowly, the tiny click of the latch echoing like a gunshot in my own head. I pulled the door open and stepped out. The apartment was exactly as I had left it. The hallway was empty. The shattered bourbon bottle still lay in a glittering amber puddle against the far wall. The cracked tablet was on the kitchen floor, its screen dark. The wet footprints were gone. No, of course they were gone. They were never there. Just like the voice, just like the message on the phone, my mind was breaking. That was the only answer. Stress. Trauma. It was a chemical imbalance in my brain, a short circuit in the wiring. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't Leo. I had to prove it. Stalking through the living room, I felt like a trespasser in my own home. I grabbed my laptop from the coffee table where it lay dormant. I flipped it open. My fingers stabbed at the power button. The machine whirred to life. The familiar startup chime, a shocking blast of normalcy. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely guide the cursor. I opened a browser. The blank white search bar stared at me. My fingers flew across the keyboard, clumsy and desperate. Imaginary friend returns in adulthood. Enter. The screen flooded with blue links. Forums. Psychology articles. Medical journals. My heart gave a small, traitorous leap of hope. This was a thing. A known thing. Other people had this. I wasn't alone. I wasn't uniquely broken. My eyes scanned the headlines. Stress-induced hallucinations. The tulpa phenomenon. Creating thought forms. Dissociative disorders, and childhood trauma. One link snagged my attention, a news article from a local paper in Ohio. Man claims childhood friend drove him to arson. I clicked it. The page loaded. It was a short piece about a 40-year-old accountant who'd burned down his own office building. He blamed a figure from his youth he called Mr. Buttons. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the screen. I drank in the words, searching for myself in this stranger's story. The patient reported being haunted by a memory from his childhood. I blinked. The words on the screen seemed to shimmer for a second. I rubbed my eyes. I hadn't slept. I was seeing things. I read the sentence again. Alex reported being haunted by Leo. What the hell? My blood went cold. I shoved my chair back, my eyes locked on the screen. It had to be a mistake. A trick of the light. But the name stayed there. My name. Leo's name. Etched onto the web page in black and white pixels. My breath hitched. The cursor, the little white arrow, began to move across the screen. It wasn't me. My hand was hovering inches above the trackpad. It slid with an unnatural smoothness, down the page, past the rest of the article, past the ads for car insurance and weight loss pills. It stopped on the comments section. The page flickered. One by one, the dozens of comments from readers vanished. Wiped clean, all except one. A single line of text at the very top. It was posted just moments ago. User, Ricky 1998. Comment, searching online won't help you, Alex. The answer is in your head. I slammed the laptop shut. The plastic clacked together with a sound of finality. It didn't help. The image was burned into my mind. I scrambled to my feet, backing away from the desk. My chest was tight. I couldn't get enough air. I looked around the room, my eyes wide with a new, frantic terror. The trap wasn't on the internet. It was here. It was everywhere. I saw him first in the television. The big screen was off. A black, polished rectangle that dominated the wall. It reflected the living room, distorted and dark. My own ANAL reflection stared back, and standing just behind my shoulder, a small, wavering silhouette. A boy. Thin, with a familiar mop of unruly hair. My heart stopped. I spun around. Nothing. The space behind me was empty. Just air. The faint smell of stale bourbon and fear. I looked back at the TV. He was still there. In the reflection. He wasn't moving. Just standing there. Watching me. A ghost in the machine. My gaze darted around the apartment. The glass door of the microwave. The polished chrome of the kitchen faucet. The dark pane of the window looking out over the dead, sleeping city. He was in every one of them. A dozen faint, childish shadows, all standing just behind me. A silent, watching army. I was surrounded. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a scream. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. I was losing my mind. This was a breakdown, a total psychotic break. Then, in the reflection on the main living room window, one of the shadows moved. It was slow, deliberate. The small, shadowy figure raised a hand, and it waved. A scream ripped from my throat, raw and animal. I covered my face with my hands as if not seeing them would make them disappear, but I could still feel them. 1,000 unseen eyes on my back. He was playing with me. He was showing me he could be anywhere, everywhere, that there was no escape, no more. The fear didn't vanish. It was still there, a cold, hard knot in my stomach. But something else rose up to meet it. Rage. Hot and blinding. I was not a child cowering in a closet. This was my home, my life, my goddamn mind. I dropped my hands. I stopped running. My eyes locked on to the clearest reflection, the one in the large glass of the balcony door. The city lights cast just enough glow to frame my own terrified face, and behind me, the shadow of the boy, patient and still. I marched toward it, my bare feet slapping against the hardwood floor. I stopped just inches from the glass, my breath fogging the cold surface. "What do you want?" The roar came from deep in my chest. It was the sound of a cornered animal. "What the hell do you want from me?" My reflection stared back, its face twisted in a mask of fury. The shadow behind it didn't move. But then, something impossible happened. The lips of my own reflection curled into a small, calm smile. It wasn't my smile. It wasn't my expression. They moved, forming words, but the voice that filled the room didn't belong to me. It was the boy's voice. Clear, even. The same one from the kitchen. "I don't want anything, Alex." My blood turned to ice. I was paralyzed, watching my own face speak with the demon's voice. "I'm just a part of you." The reflection continued, its voice calm and reasonable. It tilted its head, a gesture of mock curiosity. "The part you tried to throw away." After the words were spoken, the small, childish shadow in the glass raised its hand again. It didn't wave this time. It slowly, deliberately pointed a single, shadowy finger. Not at my heart, not at my throat. It pointed at the side of my head. The instant its finger touched my reflected temple, a spike of white-hot agony shot through my skull. It wasn't a headache. It was an electric shock, a jolt of pure, searing pain that made my vision flash white. My muscles locked. A strangled cry escaped my lips as my knees buckled. I crashed to the floor, my hands flying to my head, trying to clutch at the source of the fire. I lay on the floor, gasping, my cheek pressed against the cold wood. The pain receded as quickly as it came, leaving only a dull, pulsing throb in my right temple. A phantom ache. It took a minute before I dared to open my eyes. Slowly, I pushed myself up onto my elbows. The living room was quiet. The reflections in the window, the TV, the microwave, they were normal again. Just me, alone, my face pale and slick with sweat. The boy was gone, but the throb in my temple was real. The memory of the voice coming from my own mouth was real. The words echoed in the sudden, vast silence of the apartment, carving themselves into my brain. He wasn't a ghost. He wasn't a hallucination. He was something else. The words circled. A final, chilling realization that settled in the pit of my stomach, colder and heavier than any fear I had ever known. It's a part of me? The wood was cold against my cheek. My own breathing sounded loud in the sudden, dead silence of the apartment. The reflections were normal again. The city lights outside were just city lights. But the throb in my right temple was a steady, pulsing drumbeat. A physical mark. Proof. I'm just a part of you. The words weren't an echo. They were a brand. A new fact of life, like gravity or the need for air. He wasn't a ghost in the machine. He was the machine. and I was just along for the ride. Panic was a useless fuel. It had gotten me a shattered bottle, a cracked tablet, and a new, intimate knowledge of the cedar walls of my hall closet. I couldn't run from my own head. I couldn't hide from my own reflection. But I couldn't be alone. Not now. My body moved before my brain gave it permission. A series of jolts. I pushed myself up, my joints cracking. My legs were weak, but they held. I needed a voice. A real voice. One that wasn't mine and wasn't his. One that could tell me I wasn't broken. That this was just stress. That I needed sleep. Sarah. My sister. I hadn't spoken to her in almost a year. Not since the fight about Dad's estate. Ugly words had been said. Accusations. A chasm had opened between us, one I never bothered to try and cross. But now, in the ruins of my living room, that chasm seemed like a tiny crack in the pavement. I would crawl across it on my hands and knees if I had to. My phone was on the floor where I dropped it. Screen dark. I snatched it up. The familiar weight of it in my hand was a small comfort. My thumb, slick with sweat, found her contact. The letters of her name, Sarah, looked alien, a name from another life. I pressed the call button. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trying to escape its cage. I lifted the phone to my ear. 1 ring, 2 rings, each one was a lifetime. Come on, Sarah, pick up, please pick up. 3 rings. Then, a sharp click on the line. Just for a microsecond. Barely there. Bad reception. I told myself. It was an old building. The wiring was shot. It was nothing. My thumb hovered over the end call button. A wave of shame washing over me. What was I even doing? Calling her in the middle of the night. A babbling wreck. She would think I was drunk. Or worse. Alex? Her voice cut through the static in my head. It was cautious, laced with sleep and surprise. But it was her. It was real. Sarah! I breathed out. The word came out rough. Jesus, Alex, do you know what time it is? There was an edge to her voice, the memory of our last conversation. I know. I'm sorry. I needed to hear your voice. A beat of silence. I could picture her on the other end, sitting up in bed, pushing her hair out of her face. The anger in her voice softened, replaced by a flicker of concern. That was Sarah. Always the protector, even when she was pissed at me. Is everything okay? You sound weird. I'm fine. Just stressed. Work. You know. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. I've been thinking a lot. About old stuff. Old stuff? Like what? I had to be careful. I couldn't just blurt it out. She'd hang up. She'd call a hospital. I had to ease into it. Test the waters. I don't know. Just when we were kids. The old house. Do you remember, Leo? The silence on the other end of the line was immediate. It was different from the silence before. This was not a pause. It was a solid wall. I could feel it, cold and absolute. The line felt heavy, like it was pulling all the air from the room. Alex? Her voice, when it returned, was completely changed. All warmth was gone. It was flat, serious. A tone she hadn't used with me since I was a teenager and had crashed her car. Don't say that name. A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the night air. What? Why? He wasn't just anything. She cut me off, her words sharp as broken glass. You know what happened, so stop it. No, I don't know. What are you talking about? What happened? My own voice was rising, desperate. This was it. A connection. A piece of the puzzle that wasn't in my own fractured memory. She knew something. She was about to answer. I could hear her take a breath. And then the whisper came, right beside my ear, so close I could feel a phantom warmth on my skin. Tell her how much you miss her, Alex. It was his voice. Ricky. Leo. Whatever he was. My jaw locked. The muscles in my throat seized up. I tried to speak, to scream, to say Sarah's name, anything. Sarah, help me. The words were there, trapped behind my teeth, but they wouldn't come out. Alex? Are you there? Sarah's voice was a distant echo. My mouth opened. It moved, and a voice that was not my own came out, calm and cold as a winter morning. I'm just calling to say don't ever contact me again. My mind screamed. No! Sarah, That's not me, the voice continued, toneless and even. I don't have a sister. What? Sarah's voice cracked. For a second, there was just stunned silence. Then she exploded. Alex! What the hell is wrong with you? What are you talking about? I was a prisoner in my own body. A spectator. The terror was a physical thing. A block of ice expanding in my chest. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I could only watch. My hand, my own right hand, the one holding the phone, began to move. It felt like it was being pulled by strings. It moved with an unnatural smoothness, my thumb arching over the screen. I watched, horrified, as it drifted down toward the gleaming red icon at the bottom of the screen. No! Don't! Her shouting was cut off as my thumb pressed down. Call ended. The screen went black. Silence. I stood frozen in the middle of my living room, staring at the phone, staring at my hand. It was my hand, my fingers, my skin. But it hadn't listened to me. It had obeyed something else. I had just destroyed the only bridge I had. The one connection back to the real world. I had burned it to the ground. And he had made me do it. He had made me hold the match. My body started to shake, a deep, uncontrollable tremor that started in my legs and worked its way up. I was losing. I was losing the war for my own mind, for my own limbs. The phone vibrated in my hand. The buzz was like an electric shock. I flinched, almost dropping it. A new text message. The screen lit up. The sender, Sarah. My finger, now my own again, trembled as I tapped the notification. The message was short, just a few words, but they hit me harder than any physical blow. They were a key to a door I never knew was locked. Mom was right about you. You're still that monster. The phone slipped from my grasp and clattered onto the hardwood floor. The words burned on the screen, illuminating the dark room. Monster. The word didn't make sense. What monster? What was she talking about? What had Mom been right about? A wave of nausea rolled over me. The pain in my temple flared, sharp and blinding, as if in response to the word. I stumbled back, my legs giving out. I crashed to the floor, my back hitting the wall with a dull thud. I sat there, gasping for air, surrounded by the wreckage of my apartment. The fear was different now. It had changed its shape. It wasn't just the dread of a voice in my head or a shadow in the glass. It wasn't just the terror of being haunted. It was the chilling, sickening certainty that I wasn't the victim in this story. I was the thing to be afraid of. I blinked myself out of a shallow, chemical sleep. The whiskey hadn't worked. It hadn't drowned anything. It just left a thick film on my tongue and a dull, hammering ache behind my eyes. The word Sarah texted still burned on the inside of my eyelids. Monster! The couch cushions felt damp and cold against my cheek. For a long moment, I just lay there, listening to the sound of my own blood pulsing in my ears. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Even the city hum from outside seemed to have been muffled, choked off. My limbs were heavy, disconnected things. I pushed myself up, my spine cracking like a dry branch. The room swam in a dizzying circle. My balance was shot. I put a hand out to steady myself against the wall, my fingers leaving a faint, sweaty print on the paint. That's when I saw it, a clean, sharp rectangle of light cutting across the dark hallway floor. It was coming from my bedroom. Forgot the light, I mumbled. The words felt rough in my throat, like dragging rocks over sand. I shuffled toward it, one foot in front of the other. Just a dumb, practical thought. Go turn off the light. Conserve energy. Act normal. If I could just do one normal thing, maybe the rest of the world would click back into place. My hand closed around the cool brass of the doorknob. I pushed the door open, and my world stopped. It wasn't my bedroom. I stood there, my hand still on the knob, my brain refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. My sleek, minimalist platform bed was gone. In its place was a small, cheap-looking twin bed with a faded blue comforter covered in cartoon rocket ships and planets. My glass and steel work desk, the one that cost a month's rent, had vanished. Instead, a small, battered oak desk was shoved into the corner. Its surface was a mess of scratches and a few dark, circular burns, as if someone had carelessly left a lit cigarette on it years ago. I knew those burns. I had made them. The walls. The cool gray paint was gone, covered by posters held up with yellowing tape. Nirvana. Soundgarden. A snarling Kurt Cobain stared back at me from a tier near the corner of one. The air didn't smell like my apartment. It smelled of something else. Something old. Dust, aging paper, and the faint, sweet scent of bubble gum. It was the exact, perfect smell of my childhood bedroom in the house we'd sold 20 years ago. This wasn't possible. It was a dream. A hallucination brought on by stress and half a bottle of cheap booze. I had to be asleep on the couch. That was the only answer. I took a hesitant step inside. The floorboards groaned under my weight with a familiar cry. I reached out a trembling hand and touched the rocket ship comforter. The fabric was coarse and thin, worn from 100 washes. It felt real. Too real. My eyes scanned the room, picking out impossible details. The stack of comic books on the floor next to the bed. The baseball trophy with the chipped marble base on the windowsill. The small portable CD player on the nightstand, its lid propped open. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be, exactly as I had left it. This was a violation. It was a theft of something more than just my space. It was a theft of my sanity. Someone had done this. How? When? But the sheer scale of it, the impossible, intimate detail, was beyond any prank. No one could have known. No one except... See? The voice was not a whisper this time. It wasn't in my head. It was in the room. Clear. Calm. As if someone were standing right behind me. Everything is still here, Alex. Just like it was. Before you got all boring and grown up. I spun around. My heart felt like it was trying to punch its way out of my chest. No one was there. The doorway was empty. A cold draft snaked around my ankles. "Who are you?" I yelled, my voice cracking. "What do you want?" Panic was a hot wire, searing through me. I backed away from the voice, stumbling into the small desk. I had to get out. Get out of this room. Out of this apartment. Run! Just run! I turned and lunged for the doorway. Slam! The door crashed shut with a deafening boom that echoed in the small space. It wasn't the wind. It was deliberate. Violent. I threw myself against it, my shoulder hitting the solid wood with a painful thud. "Let me out!" I screamed, hammering on the door with my fists. "You hear me? Let me out!" My only answer was a small, metallic sound from the other side. Click. The sound of a lock turning. I froze, my fist still raised. The silence that followed was absolute. Heavier than my screaming had been. I was trapped, locked in. I pressed my ear against the wood, straining to hear anything. Nothing. Just the frantic drumbeat of my own heart. I slowly, deliberately, tried the doorknob. It didn't turn. It was solid, locked tight. My breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. My mind was a whirlwind of sharp-edged terror. He was outside. He was in my apartment. And he had just locked me in a cage made from my own past. I backed away from the door, my eyes darting around the room. The cheerful rocket ships on the comforter mocked me. Kurt Cobain's dead-eyed stare felt like an accusation. This wasn't a memory. It was a tomb. Then I heard it. A new sound. Scrape. Thump. From the hallway. Faint, but undeniable. The sound of something being dragged across the floor. Then, footsteps. Not the heavy tread of a full-grown man. They were light. Quick. The soft, rhythmic patter of sneakers on a hardwood floor. A kid's footsteps. My blood ran cold. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. I held my breath. Every muscle in my body tensed. I could feel him on the other side. Listening. Waiting. My survival instinct screamed one single, primal command. Hide. My eyes landed on the only option. The bed. Without a second thought, I dropped to my hands and knees and scrambled into the dark space beneath it. It was a tight fit. The frame pressed down on my back. My cheek was flat against the dusty floorboards. The world shrank to a narrow, horizontal slit. I could see the bottom of the bedroom door and a few feet of the wooden floor beyond. I lay there, perfectly still, my own breathing a roaring hurricane in my ears. The doorknob rattled. My heart seized. It couldn't. I was locked in. The lock clicked again. The door swung inward with a slow, drawn-out creak that scraped against my nerves. A pair of feet appeared in the doorway. Small feet. They were wearing beat-up high-top sneakers. The kind all the kids wore in the 90s. One of the laces was untied, dragging on the floor. The sneakers took a step into the room, then another. They walked slowly, deliberately, around the bed. A predator's patrol. I watched them pass my field of vision, disappear behind the far side of the bed, and then reappear as they circled back around. They came to a stop just a few feet from my face. They just stood there, motionless, waiting. I squeezed my eyes shut. Don't see me. Please don't see me. I tried to make myself smaller, flatter, to melt into the floor. A drop of sweat traced a cold path down my temple. The silence stretched. It was a physical thing, pressing down on me, crushing the air from my lungs. Then I heard a new sound. A tiny, almost inaudible click, followed by a slow, soft rolling noise. C-L-C-L-C-L-C-L-C-L-C-L. Something small and round rolled into my line of sight from the direction of the sneakers. It moved slowly across the dusty floorboards, tracing a perfectly straight line toward my hiding spot. A marble. A glassy blue cat's eye marble. It kept rolling, its momentum unnatural, until it came to a gentle stop, tapping softly against the back of my outstretched hand. The touch was electric. Cold. Solid. A scream tore itself from my throat, a raw sound of pure, mindless terror. I thrashed wildly, shoving myself backward, scraping my back against the bed frame. I scrambled out from under the bed, stumbling to my feet, my arms raised to defend myself. The room was empty. It was my room again, the king-sized platform bed. The sleek work desk in the corner. The gray walls were bare. The door was wide open. The air smelled of nothing but stale whiskey and fear. It was over. It had to be. A nightmare. A waking, drunken hallucination. My mind, shattered by the last 24 hours, had simply broken. That was it. I was losing my mind. I stood there, panting, my body shaking with the aftershocks of the terror. My gaze fell to my hands. They were trembling. And nestled in the palm of my right hand, cold and smooth and impossibly real, was a single, blue cat's eye marble. I couldn't breathe. The marble was a sphere of absolute cold in my palm. A tiny planet of impossible fact. My mind, which had been screaming, went silent. A different kind of panic took over. Not the hot, frantic kind, but a cold, heavy certainty. This wasn't a breakdown. This wasn't the booze. This was real. Something was in my life. Something that could rewrite reality, that could leave a token behind. I scrambled back, away from the open doorway, my eyes darting into the hallway's shadows. My back hit the wall. The marble slipped from my sweaty hand, hitting the hardwood floor with a sharp clack that echoed like a gunshot. It rolled under the couch. I didn't want it. I had to get away from it. I needed help, not police help. What would I tell them? That my bedroom furniture got swapped out by a ghost who left a marble? I needed medical help. I was a man of science, of logic. If I was seeing things, if I was losing time, it was a brain problem, a chemical problem, something that could be fixed. I needed to shut my brain off. Right now. The thought was a life raft. I stumbled toward the bathroom, my legs unsteady. The medicine cabinet mirror showed a stranger. Wide, bloodshot eyes. Pale, slick skin. I didn't recognize him. I fumbled inside, knocking over a bottle of cologne. My fingers closed around the familiar plastic cylinder. The prescription sleeping pills from Dr. Matthews. For occasional insomnia. This was more than occasional. This was a goddamn siege. The label said, "Take one as needed." I shook 2 into my trembling hand. 2 would be better. 2 would guarantee a few hours of black, dreamless nothing. I didn't want dreams. I never wanted to dream again. I didn't bother with water. I threw the pills to the back of my throat and dry swallowed, gagging on the bitter, chalky taste. I lurched back to the living room, collapsing onto the couch. I stared at the ceiling, my heart still hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The pills would work. They had to. The city lights outside painted shifting patterns on the ceiling. I focused on them. Just sleep. A little bit of sleep. Then I could think. I could make a plan. My eyelids felt like lead weights. The patterns blurred. The sounds of the city faded. The blackness came, and I fell into it. My eyes snapped open. The first thing I registered was the smell. Gasoline. Stale coffee. The cheap pine tree air freshener dangling from a rearview mirror. My head was resting against a car window, the cool glass vibrating against my temple. I shot upright. My hand hit the steering wheel. A steering wheel. I wasn't in my apartment. I wasn't on my couch. I was in my car. In the driver's seat. The engine was running, a low, steady hum that I could feel through the floor. Outside, the world was dark. The only light came from the humming fluorescent tubes of a gas station canopy. It was a lonely, desolate place. 2 pumps. A small, dark convenience store. A single, flickering light above a restroom door. The windows were grimy. A faded poster for a local rodeo was taped to the inside of the door. I looked around. No one. The place was dead. What the hell? The words were a croak. My throat was sandpaper. My hands flew to my pockets. Wallet, good. Keys, they were in the ignition. My phone. I pulled it out. The screen was black. I pressed the power button. Nothing. Again. Nothing. Dead. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. The digital clock on the dashboard glowed with accusing red numbers. 3:17 a.m. I had sat down on the couch a little after 7 p.m. That was 8 hours ago. 8 hours. Gone. Just wiped clean from my brain. A black hole where a piece of my life used to be. I didn't drive here. I couldn't have. I took 2 powerful sedatives. I should have been unconscious for the whole night. My eyes fell on the car's built-in navigation system. The screen was on, showing a map. A blinking blue dot showed my current location. I zoomed out, and out, and out again. The city icon for Chicago was a distant shape in the top left corner of the screen. I was somewhere else, somewhere deep in the flat, empty plains. A small highway marker on the screen read US 41. I squinted at the text below the blinking dot. Jasper County, Indiana. I was in another state. I had driven for hours across state lines while I was supposed to be sedated. The base sap. My car wasn't an escape route. It was part of the cage. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Sleep driving? A fugue state? It didn't matter. I had to get back. I had to get back to Chicago and check myself into a hospital. Okay, Alex, okay, just calm down. I spoke the words aloud, but they sounded thin and stupid in the humming silence of the car. I jabbed a finger at the GPS screen, trying to input my home address. My fingers were clumsy, shaking. I tapped the home icon, the screen flickered, the map vanished, replaced by a mess of colored static. No, 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 no. I stabbed at the screen again. The static intensified, a low, buzzing sound now emitting from the speakers. Then, just as suddenly, the screen went black, except for a single, pulsating red dot in the middle. The dot was labeled with one word. Home. It wasn't my home. It wasn't my Chicago address. The radio crackled to life. It wasn't on a station. It was just static, hissing and popping. Then the automated search function kicked in. The frequency numbers flew by. 98.7, 101.5, 103.9. It cycled through the dead air of the rural night, finding nothing. Then it stopped. It stopped on a low-wattage AM station, the sound tinny and distant, but clear. And a reminder to all our listeners, the Harmony Creek Fall Festival kicks off this weekend. So get your pumpkins ready and come on down for the cider and the hay rides. Harmony Creek. My blood turned to ice. It was the name of my hometown. The suffocating little town I had run away from 20 years ago. The town I swore I would never go back to. The announcer's voice cut out. He was replaced by a different sound. A voice I knew better than my own. A voice that belonged to a 10-year-old boy with a mischievous grin and a chipped front tooth. A voice I hadn't heard in decades, except in my nightmares. It came from every speaker in the car, surrounding me. "Time to go home, Alex," Ricky said. "It's been long enough." No! The scream was torn from me. Pure instinct. I lunged for the door handle. My fingers closed around the plastic. I pulled. Nothing. The lock was engaged. I slammed the unlock button on the armrest. It made a clicking sound, but the lock pin didn't move. I hammered it again and again. Click, 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 click. It was dead, useless. I had to get out. I threw my shoulder against the window, ready to shatter the glass, but my arm stopped, mid-swing. It just froze, a few inches from the window. I tried to force it, gritting my teeth, every muscle in my body straining. It wouldn't move. It was like trying to bend a bar of steel. My body was no longer mine. "Let me go," I whimpered. The terror was a physical thing now, a hand squeezing my heart. And then my right foot moved. I didn't tell it to. It lifted off the brake pedal with a smooth, calm motion. It moved across the small space and pressed down on the accelerator. Gently at first, then with more force. The engine roared. The car lurched forward, tires squealing on the asphalt. My hands were limp on the steering wheel. They were just along for the ride. The wheel began to turn on its own, a slow, deliberate rotation that guided the car out of the gas station and onto the dark, empty highway. "Stop it!" I screamed, a useless, frantic cry inside my own head. I was a prisoner in the driver's seat, a spectator watching through my own eyes as my body was hijacked. I pulled at the steering wheel, but my arms had no strength. I tried to kick my foot off the pedal, but my leg was rigid, locked in place. The speedometer needle climbed. 60, 70. The dark trees on the side of the road became a solid green wall. The white lines of the highway flew by, one after another, hypnotic and terrible. I was being driven. Driven toward the one place on earth I never wanted to see again. Driven by him. The boy in my head. I thrashed in my seat, a caged animal. I roared and cursed and begged. It made no difference. My hand stayed on the wheel. My foot stayed on the gas. The car flew through the night, a metal coffin on a one-way trip into the past. Mile after mile of this. The road was straight. The car held its course perfectly. I was a puppet. And the puppeteer was enjoying the ride. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. My foot lifted off the accelerator. My hands fell limp into my lap. Control flooded back into my limbs like a current. I gasped, sucking in a huge, shuddering breath. Without thinking, I stomped on the brake pedal with all my might. The tires screamed. The car fishtailed violently on the empty road, the back end swinging out before jerking to a screeching, shuddering halt on the gravel shoulder. Silence. The engine idled. The only sound was my own ragged breathing, loud and harsh in the small space. Sweat poured down my face, stinging my eyes. My whole body trembled with an exhaustion so deep it felt like it was in my bones. I was free. For now. My eyes shot to the rearview mirror. I needed to see my own face. I needed to see that I was still me, that I was still there. I looked, and for a single heart-stopping second it wasn't my reflection staring back. It was a kid, a boy of about 10, sitting in the back seat. He had my messy brown hair and a familiar, crooked smile. It was Ricky. He wasn't scary. He wasn't monstrous. He just looked happy. He met my eyes in the mirror, his smile widening, and he mouthed 2 silent words. Almost there. I blinked. He was gone. The back seat was empty. There was nothing in the mirror but my own pale, horrified face. But the image was burned onto my retinas, a happy smile, the promise in his eyes. He wasn't just taking me home. He was excited about it. I was a prisoner being driven to his own execution, and my jailer was humming a happy tune. I sat there, my hands frozen on the wheel, my breath caught in my throat. I didn't dare move. I just stared at my own reflection, waiting for him to appear again, waiting for the next move. The car idled on the side of the dark highway, miles from anywhere, pointed toward a past I could not escape. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me more than any nightmare, that I was no longer driving. I was just cargo. I didn't fight it anymore. My hands rested on the wheel, but they weren't my hands. They were just meat and bone along for the ride. The car drove. It knew the way. The sun began to stain the eastern sky a bruised purple, then a sick pale gray. Trees turned into mailboxes. Mailboxes turned into houses, fences, a water tower with a faded high school logo. The sign was the same, green, peeling paint. Welcome to Harmony Creek. It didn't feel like a welcome, it felt like a sentence. The car slowed, its movements smooth and unhurried. It turned onto Elm Street, then Oak. Streets I hadn't thought about in 2 decades. The names were like ghosts on my tongue. It wasn't my foot on the brake. It wasn't my hand on the gear shift. The car eased to a perfect parallel park and the engine cut out. The silence that followed was monstrous. It pressed in from all sides. I was parked across the street from my old house, my childhood home. It was different. The ugly mustard yellow siding was gone, replaced with a sterile blue-gray. The oak tree in the front yard, the one I fell out of and broke my arm, had been cut down. Only a wide, flat stump remained, an ugly scar on the otherwise perfect lawn. I just sat there, staring. My mind was sand. Nothing moved, nothing thought. There was only the house, a place I knew better than my own skin, now wearing a stranger's clothes. I couldn't move. I didn't want to move. I wanted to disappear. Let the car seat swallow me whole. A sound broke the quiet. Laughter, high-pitched and distant. It echoed from a backyard somewhere down the block. I flinched. My whole body went tight. But the sound was just sound. A normal sound. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It's just kids. Every town has kids. Neighbors. Nothing more. My mind grabbed onto the explanation, like a drowning man grabbing a piece of wood. It was nothing. It had to be nothing. Then the blue-gray door of my old house opened. My blood went cold. A man came out holding a coffee mug. He was followed by a woman in a jogging suit, stretching her arms. A normal couple. They didn't even glance at my car, lost in their morning routine. Then a little boy ran out from behind them, chasing a red ball that bounced down the driveway. He looked to be about 7. He stopped at the edge of the lawn to pick it up, then he turned. And he looked right at me. He just stood there, 20 yards away, a small figure in a superhero t-shirt holding his ball, and he stared directly into my eyes. I froze. My heart, which had been a dull thud, became a hammer against my ribs. He wasn't looking at the car. He was looking at me. A slow smile spread across his face. A real, genuine kid's smile. He lifted his free hand and waved. A small, friendly wave. My stomach dropped. The blood drained from my face. It couldn't be. The way his hair fell across his forehead, the gap between his 2 front teeth, the shape of his eyes. It was Leo. It was him, just as he looked in the old photos my mom still kept in a box somewhere. A face of absolute innocence. A face I had tried for 20 years to forget. This wasn't a memory. This wasn't a trick of the light. This was a 7-year-old boy who looked exactly like my dead friend, waving at me from the lawn of my old house. My hand flew to the ignition. A jolt of pure animal panic shot through me. I had to go. I had to get out of here. My fingers fumbled with the keys. I turned them. The engine roared to life. I slammed the car into drive, my foot mashing the gas pedal. The tires screeched as I peeled away from the curb, leaving the little boy and his impossible face behind. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I couldn't. I just drove. I had no destination. Get out. That was the only thought. Get back on whatever highway led out of this hellhole and never look back. I took a left, then a right, my movements jerky and panicked. But the town was a maze, a trap. The streets all looked the same. The car seemed to fight me, the steering wheel heavy and resistant. I tried to turn left, toward what I thought was the main road. The wheel wouldn't budge. It pulled to the right, a gentle but firm pressure that my panicked strength couldn't overcome. No, I whispered. No, no, no. The car was driving itself again. It guided me through the quiet residential streets with a calm I didn't feel. My hands were shaking too hard to even grip the wheel properly. It didn't matter. The car knew where it was going. It coasted to a stop at the edge of a small, neglected park. Miller Park. The wooden sign was rotted, the name barely legible. The whole place was dead silent. No birds. No distant traffic. The silence was so complete it had a sound of its own, a low hum in my ears. In the center of the patchy grass field, a single swing on the rusted swing set began to move. Back and forth, a slow, steady rhythm. Creak, creak, creak. There was no wind. Not a single leaf on the overgrown bushes was moving, only the swing. Then the voice came. There wasn't a whisper in the back of my head this time. It was clear as if he were sitting in the passenger seat next to me. "You remember this place, don't you, Alex?" Ricky's voice. 10 years old. Curious. Almost happy. "This is where it all started," he said, the sound coming from all around me. "And it's where it's going to end. Time to play. Go up the hill." My eyes were drawn past the phantom swing to a small, steep hill at the back of the park. It was overgrown with weeds and thorny bushes. At the very top, shrouded in a dark patch of trees, I could just make out the sagging, crooked shape, a shape from my deepest nightmares. The treehouse. The driver's side door clicked open. I didn't open it. My body went cold. It was an invitation, an order. The voice was gone, but the command hung in the air. Go up the hill. I sat there for a long second, my breath caught in my chest. Maybe I could run. Bolt from the car, run into the woods, just keep running. But my legs felt like lead. My body knew it was no use. There was no running from this. My legs moved. I stepped out of the car. The door swung shut behind me with a solid thud. I was standing on the cracked asphalt of the parking lot facing the hill. The world seemed to tilt. My feet started moving, carrying me forward onto the damp grass, one step, then another. I wasn't walking. I was being moved. A puppet on invisible strings pulled toward the hill. The air grew heavy. Colder. With every step, a piece of a memory broke loose in my mind. The sharp smell of cut grass. A flash of sunlight through thick leaves. A high-pitched laugh, not mine. The feeling of rough bark under my fingers. A whisper, a challenge. Bet you can't. A gut-twisting knot of fear and excitement. The memories weren't mine to control. They were shrapnel, tearing through the scar tissue I had built up for 20 years. I reached the bottom of the hill. The grass was long and wet, soaking my pants. My feet found the old, faint path we had worn into the dirt a lifetime ago. I started to climb. Each step was a labor. Each step took me further from the world of logic and sanity, and deeper into his world. The world of the past. The world of that tree. I reached the top. The cluster of old oak trees stood like silent giants. And there it was. The treehouse. It was a wreck. The wood was gray and rotten. Half the roof had caved in, and the rope ladder we had built was gone, rotted away to nothing. It was just a decaying platform, a monument to a dead friendship. I stopped at the base of the main tree, the one that held most of the structure. My neck was stiff. My body refused to look up, but I had no choice. Slowly, my head tilted back. I looked up at the floor of the treehouse, and I saw them. Placed neatly right at the edge of the sagging platform, perfectly aligned, side by side. A pair of old sneakers. Keds, white with blue stripes, caked in dirt, the laces frayed. Leo's shoes. The exact pair he was wearing that day. They weren't just there, they were presented. A trophy, a welcome mat, a threat. My mind shattered. The spell was broken. Pure, raw terror finally took over. I turned to run, not a thought in my head but to get away, to put distance between me and that tree. Those shoes. I scrambled, my feet slipping on the wet dirt of the hill. I had to get back to the car. It didn't matter if it was a cage. It was better than being out here. I looked down toward the parking lot. My car's headlights flashed on. 2 beams of brilliant, blinding white, cutting through the gray morning. They pinned me in place. I threw a hand up to shield my eyes, a trapped animal caught in the glare. And standing directly in front of the car, silhouetted by the intense light, was a figure. A man. He was just standing there, his form a block of solid darkness against the blinding beams. He was watching me. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stood there, his shadow stretching long and distorted up the hill, its dark finger pointing right at me. His shape was familiar, the broad shoulders, the way he stood. My heart stopped. He was wearing a uniform, a police uniform. The light caught the shine of a badge on his chest. My eyes adjusted just enough to see his face, hard and without expression in the harsh glare. It was a face I hadn't seen in person since the funeral. Older, lined with a bitterness that hadn't been there before. But I knew it. I would know it anywhere. It was Mark, Leo's older brother. And he was just staring at me. The silence stretched. It was a physical thing, pressing down from the gray sky, held in place by the twin beams of the headlights. The figure didn't move, a block of darkness against the blinding white. I could hear my own blood pounding in my ears, a frantic drumbeat against the dead quiet of the park. Then he moved. One step, then another. The crunch of his boots on the gravel parking lot was the only sound in the world. He walked out of the glare, and his shape resolved into a man. A cop. Mark. The light from the headlights caught, the lines etched around his eyes, the hard set of his jaw. He was older, thicker through the shoulders. The easy smile he used to have in high school was gone, replaced by something brittle and mean. He stopped about 10 feet away, his hands resting on his duty belt. His gaze swept over me, from my mud-caked shoes to my wild eyes. It wasn't a friendly once-over, it was an inventory. "Alex Miller," he said. His voice was flat, without any emotion I could name. "I'll be damned. Never thought I'd see you back here." My mouth was dry. My throat felt like it was full of sand. "Mark," I managed to say. The name felt alien on my tongue. "I was just passing through." The lie was thin, pathetic. I could hear how weak it sounded. He let out a short, sharp breath that wasn't a laugh. "Passing through." He tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. "Going for a little hike in the woods at dawn?" A single brown leaf, dead and dry, drifted down from one of the oaks and landed on my shoulder. I flinched, my whole body jerking as I brushed it away like it was a spider. His eyes tracked the small, spastic movement. A tiny muscle in his cheek twitched. He saw it. He saw everything. "Passing through," he repeated, the words slow and deliberate. "And you just happened to stop right here? Of all the places in Harmony Creek, you park your car right here?" He didn't wait for an answer. His gaze lifted, past me, up the dark slope of the hill. His eyes fixed on the rotten, sagging shape of the treehouse. "This place, it's got a lot of history, hasn't it, Alex?" His eyes came back to mine. They were like chips of ice. "Especially for you." The air left my lungs. He knew. Of course he knew. He'd always known something, always suspected. The way he looked at me back then, at the funeral. The quiet hatred in a 15-year-old's eyes. It was still there, just colder, sharper. "I don't know what you mean," I said. Another lie. It felt like I was choking on it. A small, grim smile touched his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. "No? You don't?" He took another slow step forward, the leather of his belt creaking. He was making a show of it. He was in charge. He was the one with the badge and the gun and the car with the flashing lights. I was just some wreck of a man standing in a wet field, staring at ghosts. His police radio crackled, a burst of static that made me jump. A woman's voice, tinny and distant, bled into the air for a second before falling silent again. The sound made everything more real. This wasn't a nightmare I could wake up from. This was happening. This was real life intruding. And it was even worse. Mark didn't even glance at the radio. His focus was entirely on me. He was closing the distance, one careful step at a time. He was corralling me. "I remember that day," he said, his voice dropping low, a venomous whisper that cut through the morning air. "I remember it perfectly. I remember you hammering on our front door. You were a mess. Snot and tears all over your face." He was right in front of me now, so close I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. His shadow fell over me, blotting out the weak morning light. "You stood there in our hallway screaming your head off. telling my mom, my dad, telling me. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping even more, forcing me to hear every single syllable. You told us that Ricky did it. He said the name like it was a piece of trash in his mouth. He spat it into the space between us. That Ricky pushed him. That Ricky made him fall. He shook his head slowly, a look of profound disgust on his face. Funny thing, though, a real head-scratcher, we asked around. Your parents, the teachers at school, every kid on this side of town. And nobody knew a damn thing about a boy named Ricky. There was no Ricky, Alex. There was never any goddamn Ricky. His face was inches from mine. There was just you and my little brother, alone, up on that hill. A voice spoke, right beside my ear. It wasn't Mark's. It was young, familiar, awful. He knows, Ricky said. The voice was calm, almost amused. See? I told you. Lying is pointless now. Just tell him. Go on. Tell him the truth. My world tilted on its axis. Mark's accusing face in front of me, Ricky's voice in my ear. The past and the present, the real and the unreal, all crashing together right here in this miserable forgotten park. My heart was a frantic bird beating against my ribs. I had to get away. I glanced to my left, toward the trees. To my right, toward the road. There was nowhere to go. I was trapped. The circle was complete. The ground beneath my feet felt soft, like it was about to give way and swallow me whole. The pressure inside my head built and built until it had to explode. I didn't do anything! The shout ripped from my throat raw and ragged. It echoed across the empty park, a desperate sound that hung in the air like smoke. My body was shaking, a tremor I couldn't control. It was Ricky! I screamed, my voice cracking. I pointed a trembling finger at the empty space beside Mark. He was real! He is real! He's here right now! He's the one! WHO! Mark just stared at me. The furious anger on his face dissolved, replaced by something worse. A cold, flat contempt. He looked at me like I was a piece of filth he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. Jesus Christ, he breathed out. 20 years, and you're still the same pathetic coward. Still hiding, still blaming your imaginary friend. He shook his head, a final, dismissive gesture. He'd heard enough. He'd seen enough. He was done. You know what? I've got a place for people who see things that aren't there. He reached for his belt. There was a metallic click, a glint of silver in the gray light. Handcuffs. He pulled them free from their leather pouch. The chain between them jingled softly. It was the sound of a closing cage. Maybe a night in a nice quiet cell will help you remember what really happened, he said, taking the final step toward me. His hand shot out, reaching for my wrist. I flinched back, but there was nowhere to run. His fingers were about to close around my arm. The cold metal was about to touch my skin. Sheriff, come in. The voice from the radio was loud this time, clear and sharp. A different voice. Male. Urgent. It sliced through the tension, making both of us freeze. Mark's hands stopped, hovering inches from my arm. His head was turned slightly, his ear cocked toward his shoulder where the radio was clipped. His eyes never left my face. Sheriff, we've got a 10 to 91V. Call just came in. It's a frantic female. 10 to 91V. Victim case. The old police codes. I didn't know how I remembered that. Caller's name is Sarah Miller, the radio crackled. My sister's name. Mark's eyes widened, just for a second. The contempt flickered. The voice on the radio pressed on, oblivious to the drama playing out on the wet grass of Miller Park. She says her brother, Alex Miller, is missing. Drove off this morning. She's worried he's in danger, a danger to himself. Says he hasn't been himself. A beat of static. The silence seemed to roar in my ears. Mark's expression was unreadable now, a mask of stone. Caller sounded pretty spooked, Sheriff. Said he was talking about going back home. Said he was acting strange. Kept repeating a name. The air grew thick, heavy. I couldn't breathe. The radio buzzed again, clear as a bell. She said he wouldn't stop talking about Leo. The name fell into the silence between us. Leo. Mark's face changed. It was like watching a crack spread across a sheet of ice. The certainty, the contempt, The 20 years of cold, hard hatred, it all vanished. In its place was something new, something I had never seen on his face before. Confusion, a deep, unsettling doubt. And beneath it all, just for a moment, I saw a flicker of the same raw, primal fear that had been my constant companion for 2 decades. He was staring at me, but he wasn't seeing a coward anymore. He was seeing a ghost. And he didn't know whose ghost it was. The name hit the air and hung there. Leo. Not Ricky, Leo. Mark flinched. It wasn't a big movement, just a slight jerk of his head, but on his face, a granite mask built over 20 years, it was a seismic event. The hard certainty in his eyes shattered. The righteousness, the predator's focus, it all evaporated. What was left was something I'd never seen on him, a crack in the foundation. Doubt, raw and deep, flooded his features. For a single, terrifying second, I saw a flicker of my own fear in him. His gaze wasn't on a coward anymore. He was staring at a man haunted by the wrong ghost, and the police codes and the handcuffs and the 20 years of hate hadn't prepared him for that. The radio on his shoulder stayed silent, a dead space where an explanation should have been. Mark slowly, very slowly, lowered the hand holding the handcuffs. His eyes were still locked on mine, but they were searching now, not accusing. He was replaying 2 decades of memories, looking for the piece that didn't fit, and he had just found it. "Stay in town, Alex," he said. His voice was different. The venom was gone, replaced by a low, hollow command. It wasn't an arrest. It was a quarantine. Don't even think about leaving. He didn't wait for me to answer. He took a step back, then another, his movements stiff, unnatural. He pulled the steel cuffs apart and slid them back into their pouch on his belt. The click as they seated was a sound of finality, but not the one I had been expecting. Not a cell door slamming shut, but a different kind of lock clicking into place. He turned without another word and walked back to his cruiser. The door opened and closed. The engine turned over. He didn't turn on the lights. He just pulled out of the gravel lot and drove away, leaving me alone in the cold morning light. My legs felt like they were filled with water. I stood there for a long time, watching the spot where his car had been. The engine noise faded, and the silence of the park rushed back in. But it was a new kind of silence now, filled with a name. Leo. My sister's voice on the radio. He kept repeating a name. Leo. Why? Why had I said his name? I hadn't said it aloud in 20 years. Even in my worst nightmares, it was always Ricky's voice, Ricky's shadow. Leo was just the reason, the victim, the memory I walled off with 1,000 bricks of guilt. I should have gotten in my car. I should have driven straight back to Chicago, broken Mark's order, and never looked back. But my feet wouldn't move. My eyes were fixed on the hill, on the sagging, broken shape of the treehouse. I had come here to chase a ghost named Ricky. But the wrong ghost had answered. There was only one way to know. My car was still there, a useless metal box. I walked past it, my feet sinking into the wet grass. The hill was steeper than I remembered. My breath came in short, sharp gasps. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. I wasn't running from something anymore. I was walking toward it. I reached the base of the old oak. It was bigger now, ancient. Its branches were black claws against the pale gray sky. High above, the treehouse clung to its trunk, like a tumor. And there was the ladder, a series of wooden slats connected by 2 lengths of thick, fraying rope. It looked like it would disintegrate if I touched it. Leo, I whispered the name to the tree. The wind stirred the dead leaves around my feet, a dry, rustling sound. It sounded like a sigh. I had to climb. I had to see. My hand reached out, my fingers closing around the rough, damp rope. It felt cold and alive, like a snake. I tested it with my weight. It groaned, but it held. I put my foot on the first slat. It was slick with moss. I pulled myself up, my city shoes finding no purchase. My other foot followed. Up. 1 step. A sound, clear as a bell, spoke right next to my ear. The high-pitched giggle of a child. I froze. My knuckles were white where I gripped the rope. I looked around wildly. Down at the empty ground, out at the silent trees. Nothing, nobody, just the wind again. It had to be the wind. My mind is playing tricks on me. That's all. I took another step. The wood creaked under my weight. "Hurry up, Alex!" The voice was bright, excited, so close I felt the puff of air against my skin. It was Leo's voice, a perfect echo from a quarter-century ago. My hand started to shake. My foot slipped on the slick wood. I caught myself just in time, my chest slamming against the ladder. My breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't a memory. Memories faded. They warped. This was clean. It was pure. It was here. I had to keep going. I was halfway up. It was more dangerous to go down than to go up. I forced myself to move. Another step. My hand reached for the next rung. Snap. The sound was sharp and loud, a gunshot in the quiet morning. I knew that sound. It was the crack of a thick branch breaking under weight, the last sound I ever heard Leo make. I cried out, a small, choked noise, and scrambled the rest of the way up, not caring about the splinters or the risk. My hands clawed at the edge of the treehouse floor, and I hauled my body over a last, desperate heave. I landed on my hands and knees on the rotting wooden planks. The world spun. I stayed there, gasping for air that tasted of dust and decay. The space was tiny, smaller than I remembered. Not a fortress, just a cramped wooden box open to the elements. Light streamed in through the gaps in the walls. Dust motes danced in the pale beams. "This is the place," Ricky's voice. It wasn't just in my ear now, it was the whole room. It came from the corners, from the roof, from the floorboards beneath my hands. A cold, sardonic whisper that vibrated through the wood. "This is where you made me, Alex. Right here." I pushed myself up, my back hitting the far wall. My eyes darted around the small space, looking for the source of the voice. But there was nothing. Just debris, old leaves, a rusted tin can, a single faded comic book with its cover torn off. "When you needed someone to blame," the voice continued, dripping with contempt. "When the truth was too much for a little boy to handle. You were scared, Alex. You were always a coward." "Shut up," I hissed, my own voice, a pathetic croak. "You're not real." A dry chuckle filled the air. "Oh, I'm real. You made me real. Look down." My gaze dropped to the floorboards at my feet. There, carved into the wood with a pocket knife, was a heart. It was a clumsy, childish carving. And inside it, 2 sets of initials joined by a plus sign. A.L. plus L.B. Alex Miller plus Leo B. What was his last name? Bryant. Leo Bryant. We carved it one summer afternoon, promising to be best friends forever. A knot twisted in my stomach. The memory was sharp. The sun on my back, the smell of sawdust, Leo's goofy grin as he handed me the knife. And then I saw it. Right next to our carving, another name had been gouged into the wood. The letters were deep, angry, violent. They tore through the grain, splintering the old pine. It wasn't carved. It was savaged. Ricky. The name sat there, a scar on top of a memory. It dominated the floor, a brutal declaration of ownership. The air in the treehouse grew thick. I felt trapped. The walls seemed to be closing in. The voice was right. This was a creation. A crime scene. My head started to throb. The dust motes and the light began to swirl faster and faster. The edges of my vision blurred. "You needed me," Ricky's voice said, louder now, insistent. "You needed someone to take the fall." "No," I whispered. "No, it was you. You were there. I remember." "You remember a lie," the voice boomed, and the world dissolved. It didn't fade. It shattered. The rotting wood around me became new, smelling of fresh pine. The gray morning light became a bright, hot summer afternoon sun, streaming through a canopy of green leaves. The dust motes were golden. My jeans felt too big. My t-shirt was a faded blue one with a superhero logo. I looked down at my hands. They were small, grimy, the hands of a 10-year-old boy. And in front of me, standing on the edge of the treehouse platform, was Leo. He wasn't a ghost. He wasn't a memory. He was solid, real. His hair was a mess of brown curls, his face was smudged with dirt, and he was grinning that stupid, gap-toothed grin of his. He was alive. "Bet you can't push me off," he said, puffing out his chest. His voice was the same bright, clear sound I'd heard on the ladder. It was a game, just a stupid game we always played. "Can too," I heard my own childish voice say. "Nuh-uh," Leo challenged, leaning back, balancing precariously on his heels. "You're not strong enough. You wouldn't dare. You wouldn't dare." The words hung in the golden, sunlit air. A challenge. An invitation. And then I saw it happen. I saw it from outside my own body, like watching a movie. I saw my own small arm move. I saw my small hand, fingers outstretched, shoot forward. I felt the phantom impact, the solid thud of my palm against the thin fabric of Leo's t-shirt, right in the center of his chest. It wasn't a hard push. It wasn't meant to be. It was just a game. But Leo was already off balance. His eyes went wide. The grin vanished, replaced by a flicker of surprise, then a flash of genuine fear. His arms pinwheeled, trying to find something to grab onto, but there was only empty air. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. For one terrible, eternal second, we were locked, eye to eye. My friend. And then he was gone. He tipped backward, out of the sunlight into the shadow of the treehouse. I lunged forward, my stomach dropping into a black, cold abyss. I looked over the edge just in time to see his small body hit a thick lower branch. The sharp, sickening snap echoed up through the leaves. Then he fell the rest of the way, tumbling through the air like a discarded doll, landing on the hard-packed dirt below with a soft, final thud. He didn't move. The vision broke. The sunlight vanished. The green leaves turned back into gray sky. The smell of pine became the smell of rot. I was back in the derelict treehouse, on my hands and knees, the splinters of the name Ricky digging into my palms. A sound tore from my throat, a ragged, inhuman sob. Tears I hadn't known were there streamed down my face, hot and thick, splashing onto the dusty floorboards. I saw the fall. I saw my hand. I felt the push. It wasn't Ricky. It was never Ricky. He wasn't there. There was no one else. Just me and Leo. I was the one who pushed him. I was the one who killed my best friend. A deep shudder racked my entire body. I pulled my hands back from the floor as if the wood were on fire. The guilt was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest that made it impossible to breathe. I was a murderer, a coward, who had built a monster out of lies to hide from the truth for 25 years. The voice spoke one last time. It wasn't a taunt. It wasn't a whisper from the corners of the room. It was quiet. It was somber. And it came from deep inside my own chest, resonating in my bones like a funeral bell. "Now," it said with a profound and terrible sadness, "you remember." The world was wood splinters and the coppery taste of blood in my mouth. My hands, splayed on the floor, were the hands of a 35-year-old man. They were pale, trembling, scarred with the A.S.D. cruelties of slammed doors and careless mornings with a kitchen knife. But I didn't see them. I saw a 10-year-old's grimy hand. I saw it shoot out. I saw Leo's stupid, wonderful grin dissolve into surprise. Snap! The sob that came out of me wasn't human. It was an animal sound, ripped from a place deep in my gut I didn't know existed. It hurt. Everything hurt. The air, my chest, the memories. The truth was a physical weight, pressing me down through the rotting floorboards, trying to pulverize me into the dirt 20 feet below where Leo had landed. I killed him. I killed him. I killed my best friend. My body shook in violent, uncontrollable spasms. A low whine escaped my lips. Far away, miles away, a siren began to cry. A thin, rising wail that cut through the morning quiet. It grew steadily louder, a sound wave of judgment rolling across the town, coming straight for this hill, straight for this treehouse, straight for me. "They're coming for me," was the only thought my broken brain could form. Mark must have called it in. They're coming to take me away. The thought brought no panic, no fear, only a flat, gray emptiness. Good. Let them come. I am not a demon, Alex. The voice wasn't a whisper in the corner. It wasn't a taunt from the shadows. It was in my head, but it wasn't my thought. It was a calm, sad echo in the ruin of my mind. It was Ricky's voice, but all the malice was gone, scrubbed away, leaving only a profound weariness. I'm not a ghost. I am not the devil on your shoulder. I am your excuse. I squeezed my eyes shut, tears and snot smearing across the back of my hand. The siren was closer now. I am the lie you told yourself so you could get out of bed in the morning. I am the story you wrote so you wouldn't have to read the real one. I am the anger you needed so you wouldn't feel the guilt. I am the monster you created to hide the real one, the one in your skin. I didn't feel scared of the voice anymore. How could I? The worst thing imaginable wasn't a ghost in my house. It was a memory in my skull. The fear was gone, replaced by a bottomless sorrow. It was so heavy it felt like it could sink the whole world. I'm the part you cut off and threw in a cage. But you didn't kill me. You can't. Because I am you. The siren wailed, passing the entrance to the park now. Its cry bounced off the trees. My mind, suddenly sharp and clear, began to race. It wasn't a panic. It was a terrible, lucid accounting. A slideshow of the last few weeks. But the projector had a new lens. The project I tanked at work. The big presentation. I remembered stumbling over my words, my mind a complete blank. I had thought Ricky was clouding my focus, sabotaging me. No, that wasn't it. I remembered the night before, staying up until 3 in the morning, clicking through old photos of this town, a pull I couldn't explain. I sabotaged myself. I laid the first brick in the path that would lead me back here, my subconscious screaming for a way out of the life I'd built on that lie. The email. The one that got my boss flagged by HR. I saw my own hands on the keyboard. I felt the strange, detached sensation of typing the words while another part of my brain screamed, "What are you doing?" It wasn't a possession. It was a civil war. Ricky wasn't trying to get me fired. I was trying to burn the whole fake world down, to leave nothing left to go back to. The phone call to Sarah. Hearing her voice, a lifeline. I had tried to warn her, to tell her about Ricky, but the words that came out were cold, cruel. I pushed her away. Not him. Me. It was a desperate act of quarantine. Keep the innocent away from the crime scene. Keep her safe from me. Every fight. Every wrong turn. Every moment of paranoia. It was all a map, a trail of breadcrumbs laid by the sanest part of my insanity. The voice wasn't dragging me into the dark. It had been clawing its way toward the light, dragging me with it. The constriction I'd felt for weeks wasn't an external force. It was the pressure building inside my own head, the pressure of a 25-year-old secret trying to break through a wall of denial. The drive here. I remembered getting in the car in Chicago with some vague idea of running, but my hands turned the wheel south, my foot pressed the gas. I drove for 6 hours in a daze, pulled by an invisible string. Pulled by him. By me. By the part of me that knew the only way to stop the nightmares was to walk back into them. All of it. It was all me. Why? I choked out, the word tearing at my raw throat. I was speaking to the empty air, to the dust motes dancing in the gray light. Why now? After all this time? The voice answered, and for the first time it was filled with an unmistakable gut-wrenching pain. A pain that mirrored my own, because you were starting to forget. The siren cut out. Abruptly, leaving a silence that was louder than the noise had been. A car door slammed shut down at the base of the hill. You were locking it away for good, Alex. You were burying it. You were burying him. That perfect life, that expensive apartment, that job you pretended to care about. It was a tomb you were building on top of his memory. You were suffocating. I couldn't let you forget. I couldn't let you forget, Leo. Another car door slammed. Muffled voices drifted up through the trees. The loop had to end. This had to end. The voice grew firmer, a final, terrible command. Go down there. Tell them the truth. Tell them what we did. And then, for the first time since this nightmare began, the voice was gone. The silence in my head was absolute. It was vast and empty and terrifying. The constant companion, the hateful narrator, the hidden part of me. He had fallen silent. His job was done. The silence was worse. It left me with nothing but myself. With the truth. With the boy at the bottom of the tree. I pushed myself to my feet. My legs were numb, but they held me. The splinters in my palms throbbed with a dull, distant pain. I looked around the tiny, wretched box one last time. The heart carved in the floor. AL plus LB, and the angry, jagged scar of Ricky savaged over it. A monument to a lie. The supernatural fear was gone. The ghosts had fled. All that was left was the cold, heavy reality of what a 10-year-old boy had done on a sunny afternoon. A push. A game. A mistake that had become a monster. I turned to the opening. I saw the ladder. It didn't look treacherous anymore. It just looked like a way down. My hand reached out and closed around the damp rope. It was just a rope. I put my foot on the top slat. It was just a piece of wood. I began to climb down. Each step was slow, deliberate, heavy. This wasn't the frantic scramble of a man running from a ghost. This was the measured descent of a man walking toward his own judgment. My feet touched the cold, damp earth. The ground felt solid under my shoes, real. I stood at the base of the ancient oak and looked down the hill. Through the trees, I could see them. 2 police cruisers parked in the gravel lot. Mark was standing by his car, his arms crossed. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the other officer, a younger cop, who was pointing up the hill. Pointing right at me. I took a step forward, then another. I was no longer a man haunted by a phantom. I was a man haunted by himself. I was a murderer, 25 years late to his own confession. And I was going to tell them everything. The gravel crunched under my shoes. Each step was a small, loud death. The sound was too big in the morning air. I kept my eyes on the 2 police cruisers parked at the edge of the woods, on the man leaning against one of them, Mark. The younger cop next to him had a hand on his holster. He saw me as a threat, some psycho coming out of the trees. He wasn't wrong. I didn't try to hide. I didn't try to run. My feet moved one after the other, left, right. Crushing a small stone, left, right, snapping a dry twig. It was the only rhythm in the world. The siren was gone. The voice was gone. All that was left was the sound of my own advance. Mark watched me come. He didn't move. His arms were crossed over his chest, a wall of muscle and faded blue uniform. The posture was the same one he used in high school when he was about to start a fight. His face was a hard mask. When I was 20 feet away, the younger cop took a step forward. "Sir, stay right there." Mark didn't look at him. He just lifted a hand, a small, sharp gesture. The cop stopped. Mark's eyes never left mine. They were a flat, cold gray. The color of a winter lake. I stopped in front of him. The air between us was heavy. It tasted like rust and old rain. I could see the lines etched around his eyes, lines that weren't there when we were kids. I put them there. "I thought you'd run," Mark said. His voice was rough, like stones grinding together. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, an accusation. I didn't answer. I couldn't. What was there to say? I tried to run for 25 years. This is as far as I got. I just looked at him. And for the first time, I didn't see the police chief. I didn't see the man who hated me for reasons I pretended not to understand. I saw a boy who had lost his little brother. I saw the 25 years of holidays he had to sit through with an empty chair at the table, the birthday cakes he never got to buy, the graduations he never got to see. The pain was right there, on the surface. It was a physical thing, a scar across his face that only I could see. My stomach turned to ice. "I need to talk to you," I said. My voice was a broken thing, a croak. Mark stared at me for a long moment. His jaw was a hard line. He looked over my shoulder, up the hill, toward the treehouse, then back at me. A conversation happened in that look, a whole lifetime of them. He gave a sharp nod to the other officer. "Go secure the scene, call forensics, treat it like a homicide until I say otherwise." The young cop looked from Mark to me, confused. But, sir? Go! Mark snapped, and the authority in his voice was a whip. The cop flinched and turned, heading up the hill. Mark jerked his head toward the passenger side of his cruiser. Get in! I walked around the car and pulled the handle. The door opened with a groan. I slid onto the vinyl seat. It was cold. The inside of the car smelled of cheap air freshener and something else. Something metallic. Gun oil, maybe. Mark got in the driver's side. The car dipped with his weight. He didn't start the engine. He just sat there, both hands on the steering wheel, staring through the windshield at nothing. The silence was an object. It had weight and edges. It pressed down on me from all sides. I could hear the faint buzz of the police radio, a dispatcher's voice calling out call numbers and street names. A world that was still turning, completely unaware that mine had stopped. I watched a bead of condensation trail a path down the window. It looked like a tear. My hands were on my lap. They were shaking. I clenched them into fists to make them stop. The splinters in my palms dug in. The pain was a good thing. It was real. Where have you been, Alex? Mark's voice was quiet now, dangerously quiet. Chicago, I said. He nodded slowly. Good for you. A big life. He said it like it was a disease. You never came back. Not once. Not for a funeral. Not for anything. I couldn't, I whispered. No, he said, and now he turned his head to look at me. The full force of his gaze hit me. You didn't want to. He turned the key. The engine roared to life, loud and violent in the quiet woods. He put the car in drive and pulled out of the gravel lot, tires spitting rocks. He drove not toward the main road but deeper into the park, toward a side entrance I had forgotten existed. We didn't speak. I watched the familiar trees blur past, the old pavilion where we had the town picnic, the swing set where I first pushed Sarah. Every landmark was a tombstone. We drove through the sleeping town. It was early. A few lights were on in kitchens. A man was getting his newspaper from the lawn. He looked up as the cruiser passed, his face blank. I felt like a bug in a jar. Every part of this town was a witness. Every window was an eye. The station was a small brick building next to the firehouse. Mark parked in a reserved spot that said Chief. He cut the engine. The silence returned, thicker this time. Let's go, he said, and got out. I followed him, past a dispatcher behind a glass window who looked up, then quickly looked away, down a short hall that smelled of bleach. The floor was a dirty linoleum. The lights hummed. He opened a door and gestured for me to go inside. It was a small room, a block of concrete with a table and 3 chairs. No windows. A dark mirror on one wall. I knew what it was. The air was cold and dead. I walked to the far side of the table and stood there. Mark came in and shut the door. The sound of the latch clicking into place was like a gunshot. It echoed in the small space. He didn't tell me to sit. He just walked to the opposite side of the steel table and put his hands on it, leaning forward. His knuckles were white. This was it, the point at the center of my whole life. Everything had been leading to this room, to this man, to this table. 25 years, Alex, he said, his voice low and tight. 25 years I've been running the same day, over and over in my head. The call, finding him, the coroner's report, accidental fall. Nobody ever questioned it. Why would they? 2 kids playing, a tragic accident. I didn't speak. My throat was sealed shut. But I always knew, he went on, his voice dropping even lower. I always knew there was something else, something you weren't saying. I saw it on your face that day, before your parents dragged you away. Fear, but not just fear of what happened, fear of what you did. He pushed off the table and started to pace. 3 steps one way, 3 steps back, a caged animal. I tried to let it go. God knows I tried. But every time I saw my mother cry, every time my dad would just stare at the wall, it came back. A little itch, a question mark at the end of everything. And then you come back to town, stirring everything up. And I hear things, you screaming in your house, arguing with someone who isn't there. People think you're losing your mind. He stopped pacing and stood right in front of the table, staring at me. His eyes were burning. So you're going to tell me now, right here. No more running. No more lies. You're going to tell me what happened to Leo. The room was silent. The humming of the lights was a roar in my ears. I could hear my own heart, a frantic drum against my ribs. My legs gave out. I sank into the hard plastic chair. It scraped against the floor. I looked at my hands on the table. They looked pale and foreign. The hands of a killer. The words wouldn't come. They were a lump of poison in my throat. I opened my mouth, and a dry, ragged sound came out. I tried again. There's no Ricky, I started. The sound of my own voice was a shock. It was thin, reedy. A child's voice. Mark didn't react. He just waited. There never was. Tears started to build behind my eyes. Hot. Sharp. I had not cried in 25 years. Not a real cry. Not for Leo. I had locked it all away. Now the dam was breaking. Leo, he dared me. My voice cracked on his name. A sob tore its way up my chest, and I choked it back down. It burned. We were up there, in the treehouse. We were just playing. Being stupid. He said I wouldn't push him. That I was a coward. I could see it. I was there again. The sunlight through the boards. The smell of sawdust and summer. Leo's stupid, wonderful grin. I shoved him. It wasn't hard. It was just a game. A joke. To shut him up. The words were coming faster now. A torrent. A confession spat out into the cold air of the room. But he was off balance. Close to the edge. He went over. His face. The look on his face. I couldn't say any more. My whole body started to shake. The sobs came, huge and ugly, and 25 years overdue. I dropped my head onto the cold steel of the table, and I wept. I wept for the boy I killed. I wept for the boy I used to be. I wept for the monster I had become to hide from it. It was a raw animal sound of pure grief, echoing off the bare walls of the room. All the lies, all the anger, all the carefully constructed worlds I had built came crashing down, and there was nothing left but this, a pathetic, crying man at a metal table. I don't know how long I cried. Time had ceased to exist. There was only the sound of my own sorrow. Then I heard a noise, a scrape of a chair. Slowly I lifted my head. My face was wet. The front of my shirt was soaked. Mark was standing. His face was unreadable. It was a blank sheet of paper. No anger, no pity, no anything. I had expected him to lunge across the table, to beat me to death. I had wanted him to. It would have been easier. But he didn't. He just looked at me. One long, final look. It was a look of judgment so complete, so total, that it was worse than any hatred. It was the look of a man seeing an insect. Something to be acknowledged and then forgotten. He turned without a word. He walked to the door. His footsteps were heavy on the floor. He opened it, stepped through, and pulled it shut behind him. The heavy sound of the lock clicking into place was the last thing I heard. He left me alone. He left me in the silence. He left me with the truth. The door wasn't keeping me in. It was shutting everything else out. There was nothing left in the world now but me, this room, and the ghost of a boy at the bottom of a tree. The hum was the only thing in the world. A low electric throb from the fluorescent lights overhead. It was the sound of a world that had been hollowed out. I rested my cheek on the steel table. It was cold. It sucked the heat right out of my skin. My tears had dried into a stiff crust on my face. My shirt was damp. I couldn't move. I didn't want to. Here, in this box of concrete and bad light, was the end, the final stop. Let them put me in another box, a smaller one. It didn't matter. The truth was out. It was a poison I had finally spat up, and now it was all over the room, all over me. The ghost was gone. Ricky was gone. All that was left was me. The boy who pushed. The man who ran. I don't know how much time passed. Seconds. Years. It felt the same. Then a new sound broke the hum, the heavy thud of the lock sliding open. The door groaned. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. The sound of a man carrying a weight. I didn't lift my head. Not at first. I didn't want to see his face. The hate. The disgust. I just wanted him to do whatever he was going to do and get it over with. A chair scraped against the linoleum. He sat down. The table vibrated. Something plastic clicked as it was set down in front of me. A styrofoam cup of water. A peace offering. Or the last drink for the condemned. I slowly, so slowly, lifted my head. My neck creaked. My eyes were swollen, raw. Mark was sitting across from me in the same chair I had been in. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his own hands resting on the steel table. They were big hands, scarred at the knuckles. A cop's hands. A fighter's hands. He looked a decade older than he had in the woods. The lines around his eyes were canyons. The anger was gone. In its place was something worse. Something that looked like a ruin. An exhaustion so deep it seemed to pull at the very bones of his face. We sat there. The hum of the lights. The silence of two men who had nothing left to say. Then he spoke. His voice was a rasp, low and gravelly, almost a whisper. "Leo didn't die, Alex." My brain did not compute. The words were just sounds, foreign. They floated in the dead air between us and then vanished. I stared at him. I was certain I had misheard. The crying must have filled my ears with water. I opened my mouth, but only a dry crackle came out. I tried again. "What?" He finally lifted his eyes and looked at me. There was no pity in them, no forgiveness. Just a flat, gray emptiness. Like the sky after a fire has burned everything away. "He didn't die," Mark repeated, his voice level. "He fell. He broke both legs. A compound fracture in the right femur. He had a severe spinal injury. He never walked again." The room tilted. The hum of the lights grew louder, swelling into a roar. I gripped the edges of the table to keep from falling out of my chair. My heart, which I thought had stopped for good, gave a massive, painful lurch against my ribs. It wasn't a beat of life. It was a beat of pure, raw shock. "He what?" I breathed. "No, that's not I saw. I saw him fall. I saw him lying still. So still. You saw a 12-year-old boy in shock from catastrophic injuries," Mark said, his voice cutting through my confusion like a scalpel. "You didn't stay to see the paramedics. You didn't stay to see them strap him to a backboard. You didn't stay for anything. You ran home, told your parents he fell, and you never spoke of it again. You let everyone believe the story you wanted to believe." He leaned forward slightly. The movement was small but full of menace. "My family moved. 6 months later, we left town. Sold the house for a loss. We moved to Colorado. Better specialists for his spine. A new school where nobody knew him as the kid who used to be able to run. A place where he wouldn't have to see you every day. A new kind of sickness spread through my gut. It was cold and slimy. Death was an ending. A clean, terrible cut. This was a wound left to fester for 25 years. A pain that had a life of its own. A life I had given it. Ricky. The ghost in my house. The voice in my head. It wasn't the memory of a murder. It was the memory of something worse. It was the screaming, living ghost of a life I had destroyed. The guilt wasn't for a death, it was for every single day Leo woke up and couldn't feel his legs, every time he had to be lifted into a chair, every game he watched from the sidelines, every girl who looked at him with pity instead of interest. I had multiplied his pain by 25 years, by 365 days a year. The number was astronomical. It was a weight that would crush the sun. My own breathing was loud in my ears. A panicked, ragged gasping. "Why?" The word ripped out of my throat. "Why didn't anyone? Why didn't you tell me? You let me believe all this time." Mark's face tightened. For a second, a flicker of the old anger returned, a pilot light of pure hate that had never truly gone out. "Tell you?" he hissed, leaning closer over the table. "You think you had a right to know? You think we owed you a status report? You built a wall of lies around yourself so thick nobody could get through. You first, Alex. Then your parents. He's fragile, they said. He's been through a trauma. They protected you. They packed up your guilt and shipped it off with you to Chicago so you could have a big, successful life while my brother learned how to use a catheter. He slammed his hand flat on the table. The sound was a gunshot in the small room. I flinched so hard my teeth clicked together. My parents, he continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl, didn't want your life ruined. They saw what happened. An accident. A stupid, childish shove with a horrific outcome. They didn't want 2 lives destroyed. They just wanted to focus on what was left of Leo's. So they chose silence. Everyone chose silence. And you? You chose to forget. You locked it away and created a damn ghost to take the blame because you were too much of a coward to face the boy in the wheelchair you created. He pushed his chair back, the legs screaming against the floor. He stood up and stared down at me. I was a bug. I was something scraped off the bottom of his shoe. You aren't haunted by a ghost, Alex. You're haunted by a consequence, he said. He reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out a tablet. A standard police-issue device, gray and functional. He swiped the screen on and placed it on the table in front of me. He pushed it across the steel until it stopped right in front of my trembling hands. The screen was bright. It was a video call. It was ringing. A name glowed there in stark white letters. A name I had only just allowed myself to say. A name that was a brand on my soul. Leo Miller. My blood turned to ice water. My vision swam. The hum of the lights, the cold steel, the dead air, it all focused down into that one glowing rectangle, a portal, a doorway to a hell I had built myself, brick by cowardly brick. This was the real monster. It wasn't Ricky. It wasn't a demon or a tulpa or a restless spirit. It was this. This screen. This name. This impending conversation. The horror wasn't in the shadows or the whispers. It was here, in the bright, unforgiving light of a concrete room. Mark didn't say another word. He just stood there, watching me. His arms were crossed. He was a sentinel at the gates of my personal judgment day. My hand shook. It moved as if it belonged to someone else. A tremor traveled up my arm, into my shoulder, my neck. I looked at the screen. The call kept ringing. A soft, digital chime that was louder than 1,000 screams. There was no running, there was no hiding, the movie was over, the lights were up, the ghost wasn't in the house. The monster wasn't under the bed. The monster was me. And the man I turned into a ghost was on the other end of the line, waiting. My finger, slick with cold sweat, moved through the air. It hovered over the screen, over the green accept button. It was the longest journey of my life, that final half inch. I pressed it.